I'm so hungry. Are you still eating that? Annie gasped. She stood in front of a row of stone benches in the park, clutching a folder tightly against her chest. She tried not to stare too long at the paper food box beside the man in the dark wool coat. She swallowed hard. Gulp, gulp. The sound rose from her throat, so clear it embarrassed her. It was as if the hunger inside her had found a voice of its own. If you're not going to eat that anymore, she said, her voice almost a whisper. May I have it, sir? The man lifted his eyes from his phone. He did not answer right away. He looked at Annie, then at the food box. Then he glanced around the park, as if he thought she might be speaking to someone standing behind him. Are you asking me? He said. Annie's face flushed at once. She tightened her grip on the folder. Yes, sir. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bother you. The man studied her in silence for a moment. She looked clean. The shirt she wore was old, but it had been washed and neatly pressed. Her shoes had a few scuff marks, but they were not dirty. Her hair was tied back neatly at the nape of her neck. At a glance, no one would have thought she was someone desperate enough to ask for leftover food in a park. He glanced down at the food box beside him. Why are you standing here asking for leftovers? He asked. His voice was not harsh, but it was not exactly gentle either. You don't look like someone who can't afford food. Annie lowered her head. The words hurt more than she expected. If I could afford it, she said softly, I wouldn't be asking you. The man leaned back slightly. You don't have any money? Annie parted her lips as if to answer, then pressed them together again. A moment later, with trembling fingers, she reached into the pocket of her coat, took out a few coins, and held them in her palm. 3 quarters, 2 dimes, 1 nickel, and a few tiny pennies. In the late afternoon sunlight, they looked even smaller than they had that morning. This is all I have left, she said. I tried to save some of it for copies. I need to print more resumes. Some places still ask for paper applications, and the print shop charges by the page. She swallowed again, more quietly this time. I thought, if I just kept applying, maybe someone would call me back. Something in the man's expression shifted, if only for a moment. You're looking for a job? Yes, sir. With that folder? She nodded. I've been walking since this morning. How many places? 3 today. Annie tried to force a small smile, but it faded before it fully appeared. 4. If you count the one where they said the manager suddenly got busy right after he saw me. The man said nothing. Annie felt tears rising in her eyes, and she hated herself for it. I'm not lazy, she said suddenly, as if defending herself before he had the chance to accuse her. I know that's what people think when they see someone asking for food. But I'm not lazy. I can type. I can answer phones. I can organize files. I always show up on time. It's just, her voice grew smaller. It's just that I haven't eaten anything since yesterday morning. The man looked down at the food box. Inside was half a piece of fried chicken and a few fries sitting in the corner. He had bought it from a small place near the park. On a rare Saturday when he did not have to work, he had only wanted to sit alone and eat a simple meal like an ordinary person. He had eaten part of it, set the rest beside him, and forgotten that the same box of food could mean very different things to different people. Still, he did not hand it to her. I was going to finish it later, he said. I only set it down for a minute. Annie nodded quickly. Shame rushed over her, making her take a step back. Yes, of course. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have asked. She turned slightly, about to leave, but the smell of the food and the trembling in her legs held her in place. She stood there helplessly for a moment, her lips pressed tight, her eyes shining even though she was trying her best to stay calm. Then she turned back to him. This time, her voice was even smaller. If you still want to eat it, I understand, she said. But if you could give me just a little, that would be enough. You don't have to give me all of it. Just a few fries, or a small piece of chicken, anything you don't want anymore. She tried to smile, but a tear slipped down her cheek. I'm sorry, sir. I know this sounds strange. I just need to eat something before I go home. The man lowered his phone completely, but the food box remained where it was beside him. Across the path, near a church van parked by the curb, a small folding table had been set up earlier that afternoon. A few volunteers had been handing out sandwiches, apples, bottled water, and napkins to people who had nowhere else to go. The man gently pointed in that direction. Over there, he said. They were giving out free food for the homeless a little while ago. You could ask if they have anything left. Annie's throat tightened. She looked toward the table. 2 volunteers were folding empty cardboard boxes. One was shaking out a trash bag, while the other stacked unused cups. The line of people was already gone. I saw them, Annie whispered. Then maybe they still have something. She shook her head almost imperceptibly. They're cleaning up. Just ask. I did. The lie came out softly, then almost collapsed under its own weight. Annie closed her eyes for a moment. No, I didn't. I was too embarrassed. The man's expression changed again, but he remained silent. Annie wiped her tears with the back of her hand. I know that sounds foolish. I know when you're hungry, pride shouldn't matter so much. But all day today, I tried to look like someone worth hiring. I didn't want to stand in a food line with my resume folder in my hands and have people look at me as if I had completely failed. Her stomach twisted again. She hugged the folder tightly to her chest, as if it were the only thing still holding her together. Please, sir, she said. Just a little. After that, I won't bother you anymore. I'll take a few fries and leave right away. She swallowed again. Gulp, gulp. This time, the sound made tears spill from her eyes. Hunger was no longer something she could hide behind clean clothes, polite words, or the folder pressed tightly against her chest. The man looked toward the nearly empty food table, then back at Annie. Before he could say anything, 2 couples came walking down the small path through the park. They were neatly dressed, like people enjoying a peaceful afternoon in the city. One woman wore a beige coat and held a paper cup of coffee. Her husband rested his hand lightly on her back. The other couple walked close behind them, laughing about something until they noticed Annie standing in front of the bench. They slowed down. The woman in the beige coat looked from Annie to the food box, then at the man sitting on the bench. Is she asking you for food? The woman said loudly enough to make Annie flinch. The man stiffened slightly. Ma'am, this is none of your business. But the woman's husband looked down at the food box and gave a small laugh of disbelief. You're not going to give it to her? The second woman stopped beside them. Good heavens, she said. This girl is standing here asking for food, and you're just sitting there with a box of it beside you. Annie's face grew even redder. Please, she said very softly. It's all right. I shouldn't have. No, sweetheart, the woman in the beige coat said. Her voice was not cruel, but direct in the way of someone used to saying exactly what she thought. This is not all right. The second man shook his head at Robert. That's cold, sir. You don't want it anymore. But you still won't give it to her? I never said I wouldn't, Robert replied. Well, you're taking your time, the woman said. A few people nearby began to glance over. Not many, but enough to make Annie wish the ground would open beneath her and swallow her whole. She did not want attention. She did not want strangers discussing her hunger as if it were a public matter. She only wanted something in her stomach so her hands and legs would stop shaking. Please, Annie whispered again, this time to everyone. Don't make this a scene. I'm sorry. I'll leave now. One of the women sighed and shook her head. Some people have everything, and they still can't give away something they were about to throw out. Her husband touched her arm gently. Come on, Linda. We've said enough. The second man gave Robert one last sharp look. I hope you never have to ask anyone for anything. Then the 2 couples continued down the path, still whispering among themselves. Their voices slowly faded into the park, but their words remained. Annie stood frozen. She was as ashamed of their defense as she was of Robert's hesitation. She knew they probably meant well, but kindness, when shouted in public, could still make the person receiving it feel exposed. Robert watched the 2 couples until they disappeared behind the trees. Then he turned back to Annie. Her shoulders had drawn inward. Both hands still clutched the folder, as if it were the last solid thing left in her life. He did not see a lazy person standing before him. He saw someone trying to apologize for being hungry. Someone who had worn the cleanest shirt she owned, walked all day with a stack of resumes in her hands, saved every coin for photocopies, and still ended up standing in front of a stranger, asking for a few cold fries. His voice softened. Sit down. Annie blinked. Sir? Sit down, he repeated, more gently this time. You look like you're about to fall over. I don't want to take your seat. You're not taking anything. There's room. She hesitated. She still did not know whether it was permission or pity. But then her knees trembled, and pride was no longer strong enough to keep her standing. Annie sat down on the edge of the bench. carefully leaving space between them. She placed the folder on her lap and smoothed the bent corner of the papers with her thumb. Robert picked up the food box and held it out to her. "Take it." Annie stared at the box. "But you said you were going to finish it." "I changed my mind. I don't want to take all of it. You asked for a little," he said. "I'm giving you the rest. I'll pay you back one day," she said quickly. "I don't know when, but I will." Robert looked at the coin still lying in her palm and shook his head. "No, keep that money for your copies." Annie reached for the food box. Her fingers trembled so badly that the fries shifted against the cardboard. She picked up one fry, then paused, as if she still needed permission. "Go ahead," he said quietly. She put the fry into her mouth. It was cold, soft in the middle, salty on her tongue. It should not have been anything special. Just one leftover fry from a stranger's lunch. But Annie covered her mouth with her hand, and tears slid silently down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered through her tears. "I'm so sorry." "For what?" "For standing here like this." Robert looked at her for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low, gentle, and clear. "Being hungry is not a crime." Those words were so simple that they seemed almost unremarkable. But Annie cried even harder, because all day long, no one had said anything to her that was both so simple and so kind. After a while, Robert asked softly, "What kind of work are you looking for?" Annie quickly took a napkin from the food box and wiped her tears. She tried to take a deep breath, tried to pull herself back into the posture of a job applicant, not a girl who had just cried over a cold French fry. "Mostly office work," she said. "Reception, filing." "Data. You said everywhere wants experience." "Yes, sir. So how are you supposed to get experience?" Annie looked at him. She was too tired to pretend she had a good answer. "That's exactly what I keep wondering," she said. There was no bitterness in her voice, only exhaustion. And that touched Robert more deeply than any complaint could have. "Where was the last place you applied?" "A property management office," Annie replied. "They needed help with tenant files and appointment calls. I thought maybe—" She shook her head. "They said I wasn't ready to start right away." Robert leaned back against the bench. In the pocket of his coat was a business card. Printed on it were the words, "Robert Whitman, founder and CEO, Whitman Capital and Properties. My company is hiring for an entry-level administrative position," he said. Annie stopped eating. Robert noticed at once that the first thing to appear in her eyes was not hope. It was fear. "Please don't say that just to be kind," she said quietly. "People say nice things when they feel guilty. Then they go home, and nothing ever comes of it. I don't blame them. It's just, I can't take another fake door today." Robert reached into his coat pocket and took out the business card. He turned it over, wrote a few short lines on the back, and signed his name beneath them. Then he handed it to her. Annie looked at the front of the card. "Robert Whitman, founder and CEO, Whitman Capital and Properties." She held her breath. "You're Robert Whitman?" "That depends," he said. "If you're asking the man whose leftover fries you just asked for, then I'm just Robert." A tiny laugh slipped out through Annie's tears. "This is not a job offer," Robert said. "This is an interview. You'll take the same skills test as every other applicant. If you can do the work, you'll get a fair chance. That is all I can promise." Annie held the card as if it were made of glass. "I don't have a suit. Wear what you're wearing today. My shoes are old." "Then wear the old shoes and be on time." She looked down at the food box, then at the folder on her lap, and finally at the business card in her hand. Only a few minutes earlier, all she had wanted was enough food to make the walk home. Now Monday morning appeared before her like a thin line of light at the end of a dark hallway. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Robert looked across the park. "Because you asked for food while still holding a folder full of resumes," he said. "That tells me you're hungry, but it also tells me you haven't given up. If this moment touched your heart, please take a second to like this video. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from, because your voice matters here. And if you believe in stories about kindness, dignity, and second chances, please subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next one." Annie turned her face away, but she could not stop another tear from falling. The sun was slowly sinking behind the trees. People kept walking past. Cars kept moving along the road outside the park. Chicago did not stop for one small conversation on a park bench. But Annie knew something in her life had changed. She had asked a stranger for a little food, and somehow she had been given a chance. For a long while, neither of them said anything. Annie finished the last few fries, then folded the top of the paper box neatly, as if it were an important task. She did not lick her fingers, even though hunger urged her to. She wiped her hands with a napkin, smoothed it flat, and placed it inside the empty box. Robert noticed everything. "Do you have a phone?" he asked. Annie hesitated. "Yes, sir, but my minutes are almost gone." "Can it still receive calls?" "If I'm near Wi-Fi, yes, sometimes." She gave an embarrassed little shrug. "It's prepaid." Robert nodded as though it were an ordinary work detail, not another hardship in her life. "Write your phone number on the back of one of those papers. I'll have my office confirm the appointment." Annie took a pen from the side pocket of her folder. The cap had teeth marks on it, and at first the ink came out unevenly. She shook the pen once, then wrote carefully. Her handwriting was small, neat, and orderly. When she handed him the paper, her fingertips brushed the edge of Robert's glove, and she quickly pulled her hand back. "I'm sorry. You apologize a lot." "I know." "Why?" Annie looked down at the empty box on her lap. "Because people usually get less annoyed if you apologize first." Robert did not answer right away. The sentence was too heavy for a conversation on a park bench. It made him think of his mother, many years ago. "My mother used to do that too," he said. Annie glanced at him. "Apologize for not having enough money, for needing more time, for making people wait." He looked toward the small path where dry leaves were rolling across the sidewalk. "My mother used to work double shifts at a roadside diner. When she came home, her shoes always smelled like coffee and frying oil. When I was a boy, I hated that smell." "Why?" "Because I was proud in the way only poor children know how to be proud. I wanted our life to look better than it really was." Robert breathed out softly, almost like a sad laugh. "It took me years to understand that the smell meant my mother had been standing all day so I could sit in a classroom." Annie listened in silence. She had not expected a man like him to have a story like that. "My grandmother raised me," Annie said after a quiet moment. "She used to clean rooms in a hotel. She always carried a little sewing kit in her purse. She said a woman should never lose a button, and her dignity on the same day." Robert smiled. "She sounds like a very wise woman." She was. Annie's lips trembled, but she kept herself composed. "She passed away 2 years ago." "I'm sorry." Annie nodded. "After that, everything got harder. Rent, food, work. People keep saying there are jobs everywhere. But every time I walk into a place, they look at me like the job disappeared right before I got there." Robert understood what was hidden beneath those words. "Monday morning," he said, "go to the front desk and show them this card. Don't let anyone send you away without calling upstairs. What if they think I found it or stole it? Then they'll realize they were wrong." She looked at him, unsure whether she should smile. "You say that like it's easy." "It won't be easy," Robert said, "but it will be clear." Annie carefully slipped the business card into the safest pocket of her folder. Then she thought better of it, took it out, and placed it in her coat pocket, close enough that she could feel it through the fabric. "I'll be there before 9. Don't arrive too early. I don't want to be late. 15 minutes early is professional. An hour early makes people think you have nowhere else to be." The words could have embarrassed her, but Robert's tone was practical, not mocking. So Annie simply nodded and memorized the advice, the way she memorized every useful thing that might help her survive another day. 15 minutes early, she repeated. "And eat breakfast." A shadow passed across her face before she could hide it. Robert saw it. He reached for his wallet, then stopped. "There's a coffee stand across the street," he said. "Come with me. I'll buy you a sandwich for tonight and one for tomorrow morning. Consider it part of preparing for the interview." Annie nearly refused. Robert could see the refusal forming on her lips, but then her stomach gave another small sound, and she closed her mouth. "All right," she whispered. "Thank you." Robert threw the empty food box into the trash. Annie held her folder with both hands and walked beside him. At the coffee stand, Robert ordered 2 turkey sandwiches, a bottle of water, and a banana. Annie watched the cashier ring up the order, then turned away before she could see the total. Robert paid without saying another word. When he handed her the paper bag, Annie did not cry this time. She simply held it close against her folder and said, "I'll do my very best on Monday." "I expect you will," Robert replied. Annie took a few steps back toward the bus stop. Then she remembered the fare and looked down at the sidewalk. Robert noticed immediately. "Are you planning to walk home?" "It isn't very far, sir." It was very far. They both knew it. Robert did not argue. He simply said, "Keep those coins for your copies." Annie nodded. Annie had taken only 10 steps toward the sidewalk when Robert called after her. "Miss?" She turned quickly, clutching the sandwich bag and folder as if both might be taken back. "Yes, sir." Robert stood beside the coffee stand with one hand in his coat pocket. The afternoon wind moved through the trees behind him, lifting a few leaves across the path. He looked embarrassed for the first time, not because of her, but because he had realized something basic had been handled too quickly. "I wrote Annie Carter on the card," he said. "I saw the name on the top page when you handed me your number, but I should have asked properly. What's your name?" She blinked, then looked down at the folder. "Annie Carter. Annie Carter," he repeated, slower, as if making sure it belonged to a person and not just an application. "All right. Monday morning. Annie Carter." Something about hearing her full name in his voice made her throat tighten. All day, people had glanced at that name, judged it, filed it away, dismissed it. Robert said it like it was worth remembering. "Yes, sir," she said. "Monday morning." "And I'm Robert," he added. She gave a nervous little smile. "I don't think I can call you Robert. Most people at the office call me Mr. Whitman." "Then I'll call you Mr. Whitman. That'll do." He looked at the bus stop, then at the long stretch of sidewalk leading south. "You're sure you can get home?" "I can walk." "That wasn't what I asked." Annie shifted the bag against her chest. "I'll be fine." Robert studied her face. She was trying to sound stronger than she felt. He recognized the habit. His mother had done the same thing when bills sat unopened on the kitchen counter. "Fine," she would say, while stretching a pot of soup with water. "Fine," while sewing the same cuff for the third time. "Fine," while standing between her child and the truth that life was pressing too hard. He did not insult Annie by arguing. "Then keep to the main streets." "I will. And eat one of those sandwiches before you sleep." "I will. And Monday, if anyone at the front desk gives you trouble, you ask them to call my assistant, Mrs. Elaine Porter. Her name will be in the system." Annie nodded carefully. "Mrs. Elaine Porter." Robert almost smiled. She repeated instructions like a person who had learned that one missed detail could cost too much. "Good." Annie turned again, but she did not leave right away. She looked at him as though there was one more thing inside her, something too heavy for a simple thank you. "Mr. Whitman?" "Yes?" "I'm not going to embarrass you." He frowned. "Embarrass me?" "At your office." She held the folder tighter. "I know people might wonder why I'm there. I know I don't look like." She stopped and searched for the right word. "Like someone who belongs in a place like that. But I'll be respectful. I'll be clean. I'll answer questions the right way. I won't make you regret it." The words bothered him more than he expected, not because they were wrong, but because they revealed how much of her life had trained her to make herself smaller before anyone asked. "Annie," he said, and she looked up at the sound of her name. "You are not coming to my office to protect my reputation. You're coming to interview for a job." Her eyes lowered. "Yes, sir. And if you get nervous, say so. If you don't understand a question, ask. If you need a minute, take one. A professional person isn't someone who never needs help. It's someone who tells the truth and does the work." She swallowed. This time there was no loud gulp, no shameful sound of hunger, only the effort of holding herself together. "I can do that," she said. "I believe you can." Those 4 words followed her all the way out of the park. Annie walked until the city changed around her. The towers gave way to smaller storefronts, the weekend crowds thinned, and the wind sharpened between older buildings. She did not open the sandwich bag until she reached a bus shelter several blocks away. She sat on the bench inside it, where the glass blocked some of the cold, and unwrapped one sandwich with careful fingers. Turkey, lettuce, a slice of tomato, a little mustard, nothing fancy. Still, she took the first bite and closed her eyes. Food tasted different when she did not have to beg for each bite after receiving it. It tasted like permission to keep going. She saved the banana for morning and tucked the second sandwich into her folder bag, wrapped inside the paper so it would not touch the resumes. Then she pulled out Robert's card again. Robert Whitman, founder and CEO. Whitman Capital and Properties. She read the handwritten line on the back until the words blurred. Please allow Annie Carter to see me Monday at 9 a.m. It looked official. It looked impossible. By the time Annie reached her rented room above the laundromat, the sky had gone gray-blue. The hallway smelled of detergent, old carpet, and someone frying onions behind a closed door. Her room was small, but she kept it neat because neatness was one thing poverty had not yet taken from her. A narrow bed stood against the wall. A second-hand lamp sat on a crate beside it. 3 blouses hung from a pipe in the corner. On the little table by the window lay an envelope marked rent in her own handwriting. Annie set the food down first, then the folder, then the business card. She placed the card in the center of the table and stared at it. The room was quiet except for the machines rumbling below. Usually that sound made her feel trapped, as if the whole building were shaking but going nowhere. Tonight it sounded almost steady, like a heart that had not given up. She washed her blouse in the sink again, even though it was not dirty enough to need it. She scrubbed the collar gently, rinsed it, and hung it over the shower rod. Then she cleaned her shoes with a damp cloth until the old leather gave back a little shine. She laid out her skirt, checked the hem, and found one loose thread. Her grandmother's voice rose in her mind, calm and firm. A woman should never lose a button and lose her dignity on the same day. Annie found the tiny sewing kit her grandmother had left her and fixed the thread by the weak light of the lamp. Later, she sat on the edge of the bed with the second sandwich untouched beside her. She wanted to save it for morning, but fear whispered that morning might be long and the interview might be longer. So she ate half and wrapped the rest. Before lying down, she took Robert's card and slipped it under the lamp base, where it could not fall, bend, or disappear. Then doubt came, as it always did when the room went dark. What if the guard laughed at her? What if Robert forgot? What if his assistant said there had been a mistake? What if Monday became just another door closing in a cleaner building? Annie turned on her side and stared at the card in the dim light. No, she whispered to herself. 15 minutes early. Old shoes. Tell the truth. Do the work. She repeated it until the words became steadier than fear. Outside, Chicago moved through another Saturday night. Trains passed in the distance. A siren rose and faded. Someone laughed on the sidewalk below. Annie lay awake longer than she wanted to, but for the first time in many nights, she was not counting coins or failures. She was counting the hours until Monday. Monday came with a gray sky and the kind of cold that slipped through seams. Annie woke before her alarm, not because she had slept well, but because hope had kept touching her shoulder all night. For a few seconds, she forgot where she was in the story of her own life. Then she saw the business card under the lamp base. Please allow Annie Carter to see me Monday at 9 a.m. She sat up slowly. The card was still there. The words had not changed in the dark. Annie washed at the small sink, moving carefully so she would not splash water onto the blouse she had dried overnight. She brushed lint from her skirt, tied her hair back, and ate the last half of the sandwich Robert had bought her. She took small bites, not because she was full, but because she wanted the food to last until the interview was over. The banana went into her bag beside the folder, wrapped in a paper towel like something precious. At 7:40, she left the room. It was too early. But sitting inside had become impossible. She walked instead of taking the bus, partly to save the fare, partly because movement gave her fear somewhere to go. By the time she reached downtown, her feet ached, but her blouse was still clean, and her folder was dry beneath her coat. Whitman Capital and Properties rose above the block in glass and steel. The building did not look cruel. That almost made it worse. Cruel doors were easier to face than quiet, expensive ones that opened smoothly for everyone except people like her. Annie stood across the street and looked at the entrance. Men and women moved through the revolving doors with coffee cups, leather bags, badges swinging from their necks. They did not pause. They did not wonder whether the lobby would accept them. She checked the time on her phone. Body and Centurarfen. Too early. Robert's voice returned to her. 15 minutes early is professional. An hour early tells people you had nowhere else to be. Annie walked one slow block, then another. She stopped in front of a shop window and pretended to look at scarves she could not buy. At 8:43, she crossed back. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of coffee, polished stone, and something floral near the reception desk. Her shoes made soft sounds on the floor. She felt every step. The security guard glanced up as she approached. "Good morning," Annie said. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted, so she tried again. "I'm here to see Mr. Robert Whitman. I have an appointment at 9. The guard looked at her, then at the visitor log. "Name? Annie Carter," he typed. His face did not change. That was somehow worse than suspicion. Annie held the business card ready, her thumb on Robert's signature. The guard looked back up. "Do you have identification?" Annie's heart dropped. "I have my state ID, sir." She took it from her wallet and placed it on the counter. It was old, the plastic edge slightly cracked, but it was valid. He checked it, then typed again. "Who scheduled the appointment?" "Mr. Whitman wrote this." She handed him the card. The guard read the back. His eyebrows lifted just enough for Annie to see he had not expected that handwriting. He picked up the phone and spoke in a low voice. "I have an Annie Carter here for Mr. Whitman. Says 9 o'clock. "Yes, she has a card. Handwritten note." Annie stared at the edge of the counter. Her stomach tightened around the sandwich she had forced down that morning. She imagined the voice on the other end saying there was no appointment, no record, no reason for her to be there. She imagined the guard handing the card back with pity. Instead, he said, "Yes, ma'am," and hung up. He printed a visitor badge and slid it across the counter. 18th floor. "Mrs. Porter will meet you by reception." Annie released a breath she did not know she had been holding. "Thank you." The elevator doors were mirrored. She saw herself from every angle and wished she could smooth what life had wrinkled. Her shoes were old. Her folder was worn, but the badge on her coat said visitor, and for now, that was enough. On the 18th floor, a woman with silver hair and rimless glasses stood near a glass wall. She wore a navy dress and held a tablet against her side. "Miss Carter?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm Elaine Porter, Mr. Whitman's assistant." Her handshake was firm, not cold. "You're right on time." Those 4 words steadied Annie more than Elaine could have known. "I tried to be. That matters here." Elaine glanced at the folder. "Mr. Whitman is finishing a call. I'll take you to Human Resources first. You'll meet with Miss Margaret Collins." Annie followed her through the office. People sat at clean desks behind low partitions. Phones rang softly. Printers hummed. Someone laughed near a coffee machine. Nothing looked impossible, yet everything looked practiced. Annie wondered how long it took before a person knew where to stand, which door to use, how loudly to speak, when to smile. Elaine stopped outside a conference room. "Would you like water?" "Yes, please." Annie almost said sorry after it, then stopped herself. Elaine noticed. A small smile touched her mouth. "You're allowed to accept water in an office, Miss Carter." Annie looked down. "Thank you." A few minutes later, Margaret Collins entered with a file folder and a pen. She was in her late 50s, with neat gray blonde hair and a posture that made every chair seem like a boardroom. She did not look unkind, but she looked careful, and careful people could close doors without raising their voices. "Good morning, Annie," she said. "Good morning, Miss Collins. Mr. Whitman asked that we speak with you regarding a junior administrative assistant opening. I understand you're interested in office work." "Yes, ma'am." Margaret opened the folder. "You have a high school diploma?" "Yes, ma'am." "Any college coursework?" "No, ma'am. Not yet." "Formal office experience?" Annie's fingers pressed together under the table. "Not formal. I helped at a neighborhood community center. I answered phones sometimes, made sign-in sheets, typed flyers, organized donation forms. It wasn't a title, but I did the work when they needed help." Margaret wrote something down. "Do you know Microsoft Excel?" "Basic. I can enter information, sort names, adjust columns. I'm still learning formulas." "Word?" "Yes, ma'am." "Email scheduling?" "I've used Google Calendar. Not in an office setting, but I understand appointments and reminders." Margaret looked at her resume. "Your employment history is limited." "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" The question was plain, but Annie felt the room narrow. "My grandmother raised me," she said. "After she passed, I had to move. I worked small jobs when I could. Cleaning, weekend help, front counter for a short time. Some places paid cash. Some didn't keep records." She met Margaret's eyes because looking away felt like surrender. "I know my resume is thin, but I'm not thin on effort." Margaret's pen paused. Before she could respond, the conference room door opened. Robert stepped in, wearing a charcoal suit now instead of the wool coat from the park. In the office, He looked exactly like the name on the card. Still, when he saw Annie, his expression softened just enough. "Good morning, Miss Carter." "Good morning, Mr. Whitman." Margaret turned slightly. "Robert, I've started the preliminary questions." "Good." He remained standing. "I don't want special treatment. Give her the same skills test we use for entry-level candidates." Margaret's eyes sharpened. "The same test?" "The same test." Annie looked between them, unsure whether to be relieved or frightened. Robert glanced at her. "A fair chance is not a free pass. You understand that?" "Yes, sir," Annie said quickly. "I don't want a free pass. I didn't think you did." Then he looked back at Margaret. "Judge the work, not the park bench." For the first time, Margaret's face changed. Not much, but enough. She closed Annie's file and stood. "All right," she said. "We'll begin with typing accuracy, basic data entry, a sample phone message, and an email response. It should take about 45 minutes. Annie's mouth went dry. "Yes, ma'am." Robert nodded once, then left the room. He did not wish her luck. He did not give her a speech. Somehow, that helped. Luck was for people waiting outside locked doors. Annie had been let inside. Now she had to work. Margaret led her to a small testing station near the HR office. A computer waited with a blank document open. Beside a printed sheet of names, phone numbers, meeting times, and notes. Annie sat down, placed her folder on the floor by her feet, and rested her hands above the keyboard. For 1 second, fear rose so high she could barely see the screen. Then she heard her grandmother's voice, and Robert's, and finally her own. "Tell the truth. Do the work." Annie began to type. The first test was typing accuracy. Annie copied a short memo about a tenant meeting, a maintenance schedule, and a follow-up call with the city housing office. Her fingers were stiff at first, too aware of Margaret standing somewhere behind her, too aware of the polished desk, the quiet office, the badge on her coat that still said visitor. Then the rhythm came. Letter by letter, line by line. She did not rush. Rushing was how small errors found a place to hide. When she finished, she read the memo twice before clicking submit. The second test was data entry. A spreadsheet opened with names, phone numbers, appointment dates, and notes from several property managers. Annie entered each line carefully, checking the printed sheet against the screen. Halfway down, she paused. One name appeared twice. Mr. Samuel Green was listed with 2 different phone numbers and the same appointment time at 2 different properties. Annie looked back at the paper, then at the spreadsheet. She did not know whether the test expected her to copy exactly what she saw or notice that something was wrong. She raised her hand slightly, then felt foolish. No one else was testing beside her. Margaret stood near the doorway, reviewing something on her tablet. "Miss Collins?" Margaret looked up. "Yes? I'm sorry to interrupt. There's a duplicate name here with conflicting information. Do you want me to enter it exactly as printed, or flag it?" Margaret walked over. "Show me." Annie pointed to the 2 rows. Same name, same appointment time, different property, different phone number. It might be 2 people with the same name, but the notes both mention a lease renewal, so I thought I should ask. Margaret studied the page. Her face gave away nothing. "What would you do in a real office?" "I'd enter the information, but I'd highlight both rows and send a note asking for confirmation before anyone called him." "Then do that." "Yes, ma'am." Annie did exactly that. She highlighted the rows in pale yellow and added a short note in the comment field. "Please confirm whether these are duplicate records or 2 separate clients before scheduling calls." The third test was a phone message. A recording played through a headset. A woman spoke quickly about a delayed inspection, a changed address, and a callback number. Annie listened once and caught half of it. Her heart sunk. She wanted to ask if she could replay it. Then she remembered what Robert had said. "If you don't understand, ask. If you need a minute, take one." She looked at the screen. There was a replay button. She clicked it. The second time, she wrote the details in order. Caller name, reason, address, deadline, callback number. She replayed only the last 10 seconds to check the number, then typed the message in a clear format. The fourth test was an email response. The prompt asked her to reply to a client who was upset because a meeting had been rescheduled twice. Annie read it slowly. She knew what it felt like to wait for someone who kept moving the door farther away. Her answer was polite but direct. Dear Miss Harris, I apologize for the inconvenience caused by the schedule changes. Your time matters, and I understand your frustration. I have confirmed your new appointment for Thursday at 10:30 a.m. with Mr. Price. Please let me know if you would prefer a phone call instead of an in-person meeting. Thank you for your patience. She stared at the sentence, your time matters, then left it there. People needed to hear that sometimes. When the test ended, Margaret told her to wait in the small conference room. Annie sat with both feet flat on the floor, hands folded over her folder. She could hear office sounds through the glass wall, phones ringing, chairs rolling, someone laughing near the copier. Every ordinary sound reminded her that this was a place where people came every morning and knew they had a desk waiting. Margaret returned after 15 minutes. You did well on the typing portion, she said, sitting across from Annie. Not the fastest score we've seen, but accurate. Your data entry was careful. You flagged the duplicate record appropriately. Annie breathed in, but did not let herself smile too soon. The phone message was good. The email response was better than expected. Margaret looked at her over the top of the file. You wrote, your time matters. Why? Annie hesitated. Because when people are upset, sometimes they're not only upset about the appointment. They're upset because they feel ignored. Margaret's pen paused again. That's not a bad answer. Thank you, ma'am. You lack formal experience. Yes, ma'am. You'll need training. I know, and an office environment can be demanding. People will expect you to learn quickly, take correction, and handle pressure without becoming defensive. Annie swallowed. I can take correction. I just need to know what to fix. Margaret looked at her for a long moment. Mr. Whitman is willing to authorize a 30-day trial period. That does not mean permanent employment. It means 30 days of evaluation. You would start as a junior administrative assistant in the operations support area. Hourly pay, standard probation rules. If you perform well, we discuss next steps. For a second, Annie could not speak. 30 days. A desk. A schedule. Pay. Not a promise, but not a dismissal either. Margaret's voice softened by 1 degree. Do you understand the offer? Annie nodded quickly, then corrected herself. Yes, ma'am, I understand. Do you accept? Yes, ma'am. The answer came out too fast. But Annie did not care. Yes. Thank you. Margaret slid a few forms across the table. You'll need to complete these before leaving. Tax forms, emergency contact, direct deposit if you have a bank account. Annie's hand stopped over the papers. Margaret noticed. Do you have a bank account? No, ma'am. Not right now. We can issue a paper check until you set one up. Elaine can give you information for a local credit union. Annie nodded. Grateful Margaret had not made the answer sound like a failure. An identification? I have my state ID. Social security card? Annie's stomach tightened. It's in my room. I can bring it tomorrow. Bring it tomorrow. I will. Margaret stood. You'll report to Daniel Price in operations support. He manages the administrative team. The name meant nothing to Annie yet, but Margaret's tone told her Daniel mattered. Is he strict? Annie asked before she could stop herself. Margaret gave the smallest smile. He believes he is efficient. Annie was not sure what to do with that, so she simply said, Yes, ma'am. Elaine Porter came to collect her after the paperwork. Mr. Whitman has 5 minutes before his next meeting, she said. He asked to see you. Annie followed her down the hall to an office with a view of the city. Robert stood near his desk, reading a document. When Annie entered, he looked up. Well, I got 30 days, she said. I heard. Her smile trembled. It's not a job yet. It's work. Treat it that way. I will. He came around the desk and leaned against it, arms folded. Margaret said you caught a duplicate record. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to. But you asked. Yes, sir. Good. Offices don't fall apart because people ask careful questions. They fall apart because people pretend to understand things they don't. Annie held those words tightly. Robert looked at her shoes, then at the folder in her hands. You'll start tomorrow. Elaine will help you with first day instructions. Dress like today. Bring your documents. Pack lunch if you can. Annie gave a faint, embarrassed smile. I'll try. He reached for a small envelope on his desk and held it out. This is not charity. It's an advance for lunch for the first week. Accounting will deduct it from your first check if you want them to. Annie did not take it. Robert waited. I don't want people thinking I'm being carried, she said. They won't know. I'll know. He considered that, then set the envelope down on the desk instead of pushing it at her. Then leave it. But listen to me. Pride is useful when it keeps you standing. It becomes dangerous when it keeps you hungry. Annie looked at the envelope, then back at him. The room was quiet enough for her to hear the air vent above them. How much is it? Enough for sandwiches, not a vacation. Despite herself, she smiled. Can accounting deduct it? Yes. Then I'll take it. Robert handed it to her. Good. She tucked it into her folder carefully. Thank you, Mr. Whitman. You earned the trial. Don't thank me for that. I'm thanking you for not making me feel small while giving it to me. Robert did not answer right away. Something in his eyes shifted, as if the sentence had gone somewhere old. My mother used to say there are two ways to help a person, he said. One lets everyone in the room see your kindness. The other lets the person keep their coat buttoned. Annie nodded slowly. She sounds like my grandmother. Then they would have gotten along. For the first time, Annie laughed without tears. Elaine appeared at the door and tapped lightly. Robert, your 9:30 is waiting. He straightened. Monday became Tuesday, Miss Carter. Be here at 8:30 tomorrow. I will. 15 minutes early. 8:15, she said. He pointed at her as if she had passed another small test. Exactly. When Annie stepped back into the hallway, she no longer felt like a visitor who might be asked to leave at any second. Not fully. The badge still said visitor. Her shoes were still old. Her folder still had bent corners. But inside it were signed forms. First day instructions, a lunch advance she would repay, and the beginning of 30 days. At the elevator, Elaine handed her a printed sheet. Here's what to bring tomorrow. And Annie? Yes, ma'am. Don't let Daniel scare you. He likes order. Give him order. Annie nodded, though she did not know yet how much that advice would matter. Outside, downtown Chicago was brighter than when she had entered. Maybe the sky had cleared. Maybe she had. She stood on the sidewalk, opened her folder just enough to see the paperwork, then closed it quickly, afraid the wind might steal proof that the morning had happened. 30 days. It was not forever. It was not safety. It was not the end of hunger or fear or old shoes. But it was a start. Annie turned toward home with her folder held close, walking through the city not as someone who had been rejected 3 times, but as someone expected somewhere tomorrow. The next morning, Annie arrived at 8:14. She had meant to arrive at 8:15 exactly, but the elevator in her building had stalled between floors for 2 minutes, and fear had pushed her feet faster all the way downtown. By the time she reached Whitman Capital and Properties, her lungs were tight. Her blouse was still neat, and the folder under her arm held her state ID, Social Security card, first day forms, and the lunch envelope Robert had given her. The same security guard looked up from the front desk. This time, his face showed recognition. Annie Carter? Yes, sir. Temporary badge is ready. He slid it toward her. 18th floor. Have a good first day. A simple sentence. Nothing grand. But Annie stepped into the elevator holding it like a blessing. Elaine Porter met her near reception with a tablet and a cup of coffee in one hand. Good morning, Annie. You're early. 15 minutes, Annie said, then caught herself. Almost. Elaine smiled. Close enough. Come with me. We'll get you set up. The office looked different now that Annie was not only visiting. Yesterday, the desks and glass walls had seemed like a museum display. Something to admire without touching. Today, one of those desks would be hers, at least for 30 days. The thought made her both proud and sick with nerves. Elaine led her to a small workstation near the operations support area. It had a computer, a phone, a stack of sticky notes, a black pen cup, and a temporary nameplate printed on white paper. Annie Carter. Annie stared at it too long. Elaine noticed. Something wrong? No, ma'am. Annie touched the edge of the paper. I've just never had my name on a desk before. Elaine's expression softened, but she did not make a speech out of it. Then let's make sure the desk earns you well. Your login is in this envelope. Don't share the password. Your phone extension is here. Restrooms are to the left. Break room is around the corner. If you need office supplies, ask Clara Bennett. She knows where everything is and who took what. Annie nodded fast, trying to remember each detail. Elaine lowered her voice. And Daniel Price is your direct supervisor. He runs a tight department. Listen carefully. Take notes. And don't guess if you're unsure. I understand. Good. He'll be here in a minute. Elaine left her with a quick, reassuring nod. Annie sat down and opened the notebook she had bought from a discount bin months ago. The first page was blank except for a line she had written before leaving her room. Tell the truth. Do the work. She was reading it for the third time when a man's voice said, You must be the new trial. Annie looked up. Daniel Price stood beside her desk, holding a tablet and a paper coffee cup. He was in his early 40s, clean-shaven, wearing a crisp shirt with no tie. His smile was polite, but it did not reach his eyes. Yes, sir. Annie Carter. I know. He looked at her temporary nameplate. Daniel Price. Operations Support Manager. It's nice to meet you. We'll see. He took a sip of coffee. Mr. Whitman believes in giving opportunities. That's admirable. Around here, opportunities still have to produce work. Annie kept her hands still on the notebook. I understand. Do you? Yes, sir. Daniel looked at the folder near her keyboard. You'll start with basics. Phone logs, meeting room schedules, scanning, filing, and data cleanup. This department supports people who don't have time to repeat instructions. If you need something explained twice, write better notes the first time. The words stung, but Annie wrote them down anyway. Daniel's eyebrows lifted. You're writing that? You said to take notes. For a second, he seemed unsure whether to be annoyed or pleased. Fine. 10 o'clock. You'll shadow Clara. Until then, open your email and read the onboarding messages. Don't click anything that looks unfamiliar. If you lock yourself out, it will complain to me. Yes, sir. He started to walk away, then turned back. And Annie? She looked up. This is an office, not a shelter. Personal stories don't count here. Work does. Her face warmed. Yes, sir. After he left, Annie sat very still. The sentence pressed against the bruise she had been trying not to touch. An office, not a shelter. She wondered who had already told him about the park, or whether Daniel had simply guessed there was a story behind her arrival. Either way, she refused to cry at her desk on the first morning. She logged in. The computer took longer than she expected, and every loading screen felt like a test. Her inbox had 12 messages, payroll instructions, benefits information she did not yet understand, security policies, calendar access, phone etiquette, document naming standards. She opened a fresh page in her notebook and began making a list. Password reset every 90 days. Always confirm meeting room with calendar invite. Use last name, first name for client folders. Never leave printed documents on copier. At 10, a woman with silver gray hair and reading glasses hanging from a chain stopped beside her desk. She wore a cardigan the color of oatmeal and carried a stack of file folders against her hip. You're Annie. Yes, ma'am. Clara Bennett. And if you call me ma'am all day, I'll start looking for my church hat. Annie blinked, then smiled before she could stop herself. Yes, sorry, Clara. That's better. Come on, let's teach you how not to drown. Clara walked her through the filing room, the copier, the supply cabinet, and the shared drive. Unlike Daniel, she did not make every instruction sound like a warning. She showed Annie once, then watched her do it. Scan this. Annie placed the paper wrong side up. Clara tapped the glass. Other way. I'm sorry. Don't apologize to machines. They don't care. Clara pointed at the screen. Try again. Annie did. The document scanned correctly. Good. Now name the file. Annie typed Carter Lease Renewal. Clara leaned closer. Department Standard. Annie checked her notes. Last name, first name, document type, date. There you go. By noon, Annie's head was full. Her stomach, for once, was not empty. She had eaten the banana before coming upstairs and saved half her sandwich for lunch. In the break room, she sat at the far end of the table, unwrapped it carefully, and tried not to feel out of place among glass containers of salads, leftover pasta, and takeout bowls with names printed on neat labels. 2 employees entered, talking about weekend plans. One of them smiled at Annie. The other glanced at her badge and then away. New? The smiling one asked. Yes, Annie. Welcome. I'm Tessa. Accounting. Thank you. The second employee opened the refrigerator and said nothing. Annie took a bite of her sandwich and reminded herself that not every silence was a judgment. Some people were just quiet. Some were busy. Some had already decided things. Her job was not to read every face. Her job was to learn the work. In the afternoon, Daniel handed her a stack of phone messages to enter into the system. These need to be logged by client name and urgency. Don't mix them up. Annie nodded. Is there a priority code list? Daniel looked at her. It's in the shared drive. Which folder? He exhaled, just enough for her to hear. Operations, admin procedures, phone protocol. Thank you. She found the file after 2 wrong clicks and logged the messages one by one. A maintenance request about heat. A tenant question about payment. A city office callback. A vendor asking for insurance paperwork. Her fingers moved slower than she wanted, but she checked each entry before saving. At 4:40, Daniel returned. How many? 27. There were 30. Annie's stomach tightened. She checked the stack. I have 3 left. I wanted to confirm the urgency code on these before entering them. 2 mention inspection dates, and 1 has no callback number. Daniel took the papers. You should have asked earlier. You were in a meeting. Email exists. Annie looked down at her notes. He was right. She had been afraid to bother him, and fear had cost time. You're right, she said. I'll email next time. Daniel paused, as if he had expected an excuse. See that you do. He walked away with the 3 papers. Annie sat back and let out a slow breath. Her first day had not been a failure, but it had not been a victory either. It had been a narrow bridge, and she had crossed it 1 careful step at a time. At 5:15, Elaine passed by. Still here? I'm organizing my notes. Good habit. Don't stay too late on day 1. Tired people make day 2 mistakes. Annie closed the notebook. Thank you. When she reached the lobby, the evening rush had begun. People moved toward the doors, phones in hand, coats over arms, talking about dinner, errands, traffic. Annie touched the temporary badge clipped to her blouse before returning it to security. Outside, Chicago's air smelled like rain on concrete. She stood under the awning for a moment, folder held close, feet aching in her old shoes. She had not been perfect. Daniel had made sure she knew that. But she had shown up. She had learned. She had done the work. For Annie Carter, that was enough to come back tomorrow. By the end of the first week, Annie had learned that office work had its own weather. Monday had been cold and sharp. Tuesday came with small mistakes, the kind that did not ruin anything but followed her around like loose threads. Wednesday brought a better rhythm. By Thursday, she knew which printer jammed when fed too many envelopes, which conference room had the bad speakerphone, and which drawer in the supply cabinet held the working pens instead of the dead ones people kept returning out of habit. Friday morning, she arrived with her notebook already open to a fresh page. Clara passed her desk carrying 2 file boxes. You're starting to look dangerous. Annie looked up fast. Dangerous? Organized, Clara said. Same thing to people who like confusion. Annie smiled, the first easy smile she had worn in the office. Do you need help with those? I was hoping you'd ask. They carried the boxes to the filing room, where Clara showed her how old lease documents were sorted before being scanned. The room was narrow, with gray cabinets on one side and a copier humming in the corner. It smelled like paper, toner, and coffee that someone had forgotten hours ago. These are boring, Clara said, setting down the first box. That's why they matter. People respect exciting work. Boring work is where lawsuits hide. Annie wrote that down. Clara laughed. Honey, you don't have to write everything I say. I might need it later. That one you might. They spent nearly an hour sorting files by property, date, and status. Clara corrected Annie when she placed a tenant notice behind the wrong tab. But she did it with a tap of her finger, not a sigh. Red tab means active issue, blue means completed, yellow means pending response. Red active, blue completed, yellow pending, Annie repeated. You repeat things like my husband used to repeat grocery lists. Did it help him remember? No, but it helped him pretend. Clara gave her a sideways look. You, I think, actually remember. Annie lowered her head, but the praise warmed her. At 10:30, Daniel appeared in the doorway. He glanced at the open boxes, then at Annie. I need her at her desk. Clara's face stayed pleasant. She's helping me with the Hawthorne files. Phone logs are behind. I finished yesterday's before I left, Annie said. Daniel looked at her. This morning's logs are behind. Annie checked the time. I haven't received them yet. They're in your inbox. She felt her stomach drop. I didn't see an email. Then look again. He turned and walked away. Annie hurried back to her desk. Her inbox had one unread message from Daniel sent at 10:22, 8 minutes earlier. Attached were 17 scanned call slips. Clara followed more slowly and stood behind her chair. Breathe first. I should have checked. You were in the filing room because I asked you to help. But he needed these. Then he could have said so when he sent them. Clara leaned down, her voice quiet. Do the work. Don't absorb the mood. Annie nodded and opened the attachment. The phone slips were messy. Some had complete names, others only first names. One said, Mrs. H called again about heat. Another said, City guy. Inspection thing. Urgent. Annie could feel Daniel's expectation in every unclear line. Guess wrong, and it would be her fault. Ask too much, and she would look unready. She opened the phone protocol file and began sorting. Tenant emergencies first. City deadline second. Vendor paperwork third. General callbacks last. When she reached Mrs. H, she searched the client database and found 3 possible names. She did not guess. She drafted an email to Daniel. Could you confirm whether Mrs. H refers to Mrs. Helen Harris at Wabash Court, Mrs. Hughes at Marquette Place, or another tenant? The slip mentions heat, so I want to code it correctly. She stared at the email, worrying it sounded too formal, then sent it before fear could edit the courage out. Daniel replied 6 minutes later. Harris, use common sense. Annie read the words twice. Her face warmed, but she entered the call correctly. Near noon, Robert passed through the operations area with 2 men in suits. He did not stop at Annie's desk, but his eyes moved briefly to her notebook, then to the stack of completed logs. He gave the smallest nod and kept walking. Annie did not need more than that. The nod said he saw work, not charity. In the break room, Tessa from accounting sat across from her with a salad and a bag of chips. You survived Daniel's first week? Annie looked up from her sandwich. Is that what this is called? Tessa grinned. Around here, yes. He's very clear. That's generous. Tessa opened her chips. He likes people to know he's the smartest person in the room. Annie did not answer. Her grandmother had taught her not to build friendships by tearing someone else down. Tessa seemed to notice. You're careful. I'm new. No, you're careful. She lowered her voice. People are talking, you know. Annie's hand stilled around the sandwich. About what? About how Mr. Whitman brought you in himself. Some people think it's sweet. Some think it's strange. Daniel thinks anything he didn't approve is a threat to civilization. Annie tried to smile, but it did not hold. I just want to do the job. Then do it, Tessa said. Most rumors starve if you don't feed them. That was good advice. But rumors had a way of feeding themselves. In the afternoon, Margaret called Annie into her office for a quick check-in. The office had framed certificates on the wall, a small American flag near the bookshelf, and a photo of 2 grown children in graduation gowns. Sit down, Annie. Annie sat with her notebook ready. Margaret noticed. You don't need to take notes for this. Annie closed the notebook halfway. How was your first week? I'm learning a lot. That wasn't the question. Annie looked at her. Margaret's tone was firm, not unkind. It's hard, Annie admitted. But hard doesn't scare me. Not knowing whether I'm doing enough scares me. Margaret leaned back. Daniel says you're slow. Annie's chest tightened. I know I'm not fast yet. He also says you ask too many questions. Annie's eyes lowered. I ask because I don't want to guess wrong. That's not always a bad instinct. Annie looked up. Margaret tapped a pen once against the desk. Speed matters. But in this office, a fast mistake can cost more than a slow correction. Don't hide behind caution, but don't abandon it either. Yes, ma'am. I'll review your work samples next Friday. Until then, Keep a list of tasks you complete each day. Not feelings, tasks. If there's a question about your progress, documentation helps. Annie nodded and opened the notebook despite being told she did not need it. Task list, daily. Margaret almost smiled. You may write that down. When Annie returned to her desk, Daniel had placed a thick folder beside her keyboard. A sticky note read, "Scan, rename, upload before 5, no errors." It was 3:40. Annie looked at the stack, then at the clock. For one moment, discouragement rose in her throat like the old hunger from the park. Clara walked by and saw her face. "What did I tell you?" Clara asked softly. "Do the work. Don't absorb the mood." "That's right." So Annie worked. She scanned, checked each file, named each document according to the standard, and uploaded them into the right folder. At 4:58, she sent Daniel a confirmation email with the number of files completed and the folder path. He replied with one word, "Received. No thank you. No good job. No complaint." Annie leaned back, tired enough to feel hollow, but not defeated. At 5:12, as she packed her folder, Clara stopped by with her coat over one arm. "First week done. Almost done," Annie said. "I still have tomorrow's notes to prepare. Listen to yourself." Clara shook her head. "You'll be running the place by Christmas." Annie laughed quietly. "I just don't want to lose this." Clara's expression softened. "Then remember something. Jobs are important, but no job gets to own your whole worth. You bring that with you. Understand?" Annie wanted to say yes, but the truth sat deeper than that. "I'm trying to. That's enough for Friday." On the train ride home, Annie stood because every seat was taken. Her feet ached, and her shoulders hurt from holding herself upright all week. But in her folder was a daily task list, 5 pages of notes, and a temporary badge she would return Monday morning. When she reached her room, she placed the badge on the table beside Robert's business card. The card had opened the door. The badge reminded her the door could still close. Annie touched both, then whispered into the quiet room, "I'm still here." For now, that was victory. The second week began with rain. Not a storm, just a steady Chicago rain that turned the sidewalks dark and made every bus sound tired. Annie arrived with damp sleeves and careful hair, holding her folder under her coat so the papers would stay dry. She had left earlier than usual, afraid the weather would slow her down, and reached the lobby at 8:13. The guard looked up. "You're early again. Trying to make it a habit." "That's not the worst habit." She smiled, took her temporary badge, and rode up to the 18th floor with 3 employees who smelled faintly of coffee and wet wool. No one spoke. Annie used the silence to breathe. At her desk, she opened her notebook to the new page she had prepared the night before. Week 2. Learn faster. Ask clearly. Keep records. Clara stopped by with a paper bag. "You eat breakfast?" "Yes," Annie said, then saw Clara's raised eyebrow and corrected herself. "Half a banana and toast. That's not breakfast. That's a rumor." Clara placed the bag on Annie's desk. "Blueberry muffin. I bought 2 by mistake." Annie looked at it. "You don't have to. I know what I don't have to do. That's one of the pleasures of being my age." Annie smiled. "Thank you, Clara. You're welcome. Eat before Daniel starts circling." Daniel arrived at 8:30 sharp, carrying a tablet and a black umbrella still dripping at the tip. He glanced at the muffin, then at Annie's screen. "Comfortable?" Annie set the muffin aside. "Good morning, Mr. Price." "Morning. I need you on conference room schedules first. We have 3 client meetings, 1 city call, and a vendor presentation. No double bookings, no missing equipment." "Yes, sir. And I want yesterday's call log cleaned up. Some of the urgency notes were too wordy." "I'll revise them." "Not revise. Clean up." He tapped the edge of her desk with one finger. "Office language is not a diary." Annie nodded and wrote that down, though the words stung. By mid-morning, she had learned that conference rooms were more complicated than they looked. Room 18B had the large screen but no working speakerphone. Room 18D had the speakerphone but only 6 chairs. Room 19A was technically available but used by senior staff, who became irritated if anyone scheduled it without asking Elaine first. Annie made a chart in her notebook and taped a small copy beside her monitor. At 10:45, a call came from the front desk. A city housing representative had arrived early for a meeting with Mr. Whitman's development team. Daniel was away from his desk. Tessa from accounting was on another call. Annie answered the phone, listened, checked the schedule, and saw the problem at once. The representative had been told 11. The calendar said 11:30. The meeting room had not been prepared. Her pulse jumped. She could hear Daniel's voice in her head. Don't guess. She stood and walked quickly to Clara's desk. A city housing representative is downstairs for the West Haven meeting. Calendar says 11:30, but he's here for 11. Room 18B has the screen but no speakerphone. They need both. Clara looked at the clock. Who's leading? Mr. Whitman's team. Elaine's name is copied. Call Elaine. I don't want to bother. Annie. Annie stopped. Call Elaine, she called. Elaine answered on the second ring. Elaine Porter. This is Annie Carter in operations support. Mr. Lawson from the city housing office is downstairs for the West Haven meeting. He says he was told 11. Calendar says 11:30. The room isn't ready. Elaine's voice sharpened, but not at Annie. Good catch. Put him in 18D for coffee, then move the presentation to 18B. I'll send IT with a speaker unit. Can you notify Daniel and Tessa? Yes, ma'am. And Annie? Yes. Don't apologize in the email. Just state the update. Annie almost laughed from nerves. Yes, ma'am. She sent the email. West Haven meeting update. Mr. Lawson has arrived early and is being seated in 18D. Presentation will move to 18B once IT installs the speaker unit. Elaine has been notified. Within 5 minutes, people began moving. IT arrived with equipment. Tessa printed fresh copies. Elaine came down the hall with Mr. Lawson, a tall man in a tan raincoat, and thanked him for his patience as if the shift had always been planned. The meeting began at 11:08. Daniel returned at 11:12. He stopped beside Annie's desk. Why is West Haven in Atten B? Mr. Lawson arrived early. Elaine approved the room change. IT installed the speaker unit. Daniel checked his tablet. You emailed me. Yes, sir. I was in the elevator. I also copied Tessa and Elaine. His jaw tightened a fraction. Next time, call my cell. Annie looked at him. I don't have your cell number. Clara coughed from 2 desks away, badly hiding a laugh. Daniel gave Clara a look, then turned back to Annie. I'll send it. Thank you. He walked away. At lunch, Annie sat with her muffin and the other half of her sandwich. Tessa dropped into the chair across from her. You know what you did this morning? Annie braced herself. What? You kept a city meeting from becoming a circus. I just called Elaine. Exactly. You called the person who could fix it. Half the people here would have spent 10 minutes protecting themselves first. Annie looked down. Daniel didn't seem happy. Daniel doesn't seem happy when the coffee is hot and the copier works. Annie tried not to smile. Tessa leaned closer. Don't let him make you think every good decision was an accident. That afternoon, Robert passed through the operations area after the West Haven meeting. He stopped by Elaine's desk, spoke briefly, then turned toward Annie. Miss Carter. Annie stood too quickly. Yes, sir? Elaine tells me you handled a scheduling problem this morning. I notified her. You noticed the problem first. Annie did not know what to do with the credit. The front desk called, and you listened. He glanced at the chart taped beside her monitor. Is that yours? Yes, sir. The rooms have different equipment, so I made a list. May I see it? She handed it over, embarrassed by her handwriting and the little arrows she had drawn between rooms. Robert read it with more attention than she expected. This is useful, he said. I made it for myself. Useful things often start that way. He gave the chart back. Send a clean version to Elaine. She may want to share it. Annie sat down slowly after he left, her face warm. Daniel watched from across the room. Expression unreadable. At 4:20, Daniel placed a stack of documents on her desk. Since you're becoming familiar with room charts, let's see how you do with document organization. These vendor insurance forms need scanning, renaming, and uploading, today. Annie looked at the stack. It was thick, but not impossible. Yes, sir. And don't ask Clara to do it for you. Clara looked up. Daniel, nobody asked me to do anything. I'm being clear. No, Clara said mildly. You're being Daniel. The air tightened. Annie froze over the first document. Daniel's face hardened, but Clara had already returned to her screen. After a moment, he walked away. Annie worked without speaking. She scanned each form, renamed the files, checked dates, and uploaded them. Near the bottom of the stack, she found a certificate that had expired 2 months earlier. She checked the vendor list. The company was still marked active. She emailed Daniel. "One vendor insurance certificate appears expired. Should I upload with a note or flag for renewal before upload?" His reply came back, "Upload, it's fine." Annie stared at the message. Maybe he knew more than she did. Maybe it was fine. But Clara's voice echoed, "Boring work is where lawsuits hide." Annie walked to Clara's desk. "Can I ask something without making trouble?" Clara removed her glasses. "Those are usually the questions that matter." Annie showed her the certificate. Clara frowned. "Expired insurance is not fine. Flag it." Daniel said upload. "Then upload it to the pending folder and note that Daniel advised upload. Copy him. Copy me if you want an old lady in the splash zone." Annie hesitated. "Will that make him angry?" "Possibly. I don't want to look difficult." "Annie, there's a difference between difficult and documented." So Annie uploaded it to the pending folder and sent a short email. "The certificate for Lakefront Mechanical appears expired as of July 31. I placed it in pending vendor review rather than active vendor files. Please advise if you would like it moved." She copied Daniel and Clara. Daniel did not reply. At 5:05, he walked past her desk without looking at her. Annie's stomach knotted, but Clara gave her a small nod from across the aisle. When Annie left that evening, the rain had stopped. The city smelled washed and metallic. She walked to the train with tired feet, thinking about the difference between being afraid and being careful. All her life, fear had taught her to stay quiet, but the office was teaching her something else. Sometimes keeping a record was a kind of courage. By Wednesday of the second week, Annie had learned to hear Daniel before she saw him. It was not his footsteps exactly. The carpet swallowed those. It was the rhythm around him. A chair pushed in too quickly. A phone set down harder than needed. The small silence that came when people sensed correction moving toward them. Annie had begun to understand that some supervisors did not have to raise their voices to make a room tighten. That morning, he stopped at her desk with a thin stack of papers. "Vendor update list," he said. "Enter these before lunch. Match each company with its insurance status, contact name, and renewal date." "Yes, sir. And don't overcomplicate it." Annie kept her eyes on the papers. "I'll follow the procedure." Daniel's mouth moved slightly, not quite a smile. That would be new. He walked away before she could answer. For a moment, Annie sat still. The words had landed, but she did not let them settle. She opened the vendor database, pulled up the procedure file, and began entering each update. Lakefront Mechanical was still in the pending folder from yesterday. No one had responded to her email yet. She saw it there and felt a pulse of worry, but she did not move it. At 10:15, Clara stopped by with a folder tucked under one arm. Face looked serious. "Vendor updates." The paperwork swamp. Daniel told me not to overcomplicate it. That usually means he wants it simple enough to blame somebody else later." Annie looked up quickly. Clara held up a hand. That was not official training. That was old lady commentary. Despite herself, Annie smiled. Clara nodded toward Annie's screen. "You're doing fine. Keep your notes clean." At 11:40, Annie finished the list and sent Daniel a short email with the completed file path and 2 questions about missing renewal dates. He did not respond. She ate lunch at her desk because the break room felt far away, and she wanted to review the phone protocol again before the afternoon rush. The sandwich she had packed was peanut butter on white bread. She ate it slowly, careful not to get crumbs on the keyboard. Across the aisle, 2 employees whispered near the copier. Annie caught only pieces. The girl from the park. Robert brought her in himself. Daniel's not happy. She kept her face still. Tessa's advice returned. Most roomers starve if you don't feed them. Annie took another bite, swallowed, and opened her notebook. If they wanted to talk, she would work. At 1:30, the office began preparing for a donor luncheon connected to the West Haven housing project. It was not a large event, but important people were coming. City staff, nonprofit partners, 2 board members, and a retired pastor. known for pushing developers to keep promises to low-income neighborhoods. Operations support had to prepare packets, name tags, seating cards, and a sign-in sheet. Daniel handed Annie a list. Alphabetize the name tags and put the board members in front. Alphabetize all of them, with board members first. That's what I said. Yes, sir. Annie worked at the side table, sorting names with careful fingers. Clara assembled packets nearby. Taosa came in with printed donor summaries and mouthed, "You okay?" Annie nodded. Halfway through the list, Annie noticed 2 names missing from the sign-in sheet but present on the seating chart. Reverend James Holloway and Miss Denise Porter from the South Loop Community Fund. She checked the email thread. They had confirmed yesterday. She looked toward Daniel's office. His door was half closed, and he was on a call. The old Annie would have waited. The first week Annie might have panicked. This Annie copied the confirmation email, added the 2 missing names to a separate note, and walked to Clara. These 2 are on the seating chart but not the sign-in sheet. Should I add them? Clara looked. Yes, and tell Daniel. He's on a call. Then email him and copy Elaine. Event details touch Elaine. Annie did exactly that. Within minutes, Elaine replied, "Good catch. Please update name tags and sign in. Thank you." Annie felt the words settle in her chest like warm tea. Good catch. Thank you. Daniel came out 10 minutes later holding his phone. Why is Elaine asking me about missing names? Annie kept her voice even. 2 confirmed guests were on the seating chart, but not the sign-in sheet. I updated the sheet after Elaine approved it. You should have waited for me. The event starts in an hour. His eyes narrowed. Are you correcting me? No, sir. I'm correcting the sheet. Clara made a small sound that might have been a cough. Daniel looked at her, then back at Annie. Careful, Annie. Confidence is useful. Attitude is not. Annie's face warmed. She wanted to apologize. The word rose automatically, but she stopped it before it left her mouth. Yes, sir, she said. The luncheon began at 3. Annie stayed near the reception table with Tessa, handing out name tags and directing guests toward the conference room. Most people barely noticed her. A few thanked her. Reverend Holloway, a tall man with silver eyebrows and a cane, looked at his name tag and smiled. You didn't forget the preacher. That's wise. Annie smiled back. No, sir. We were glad you could come. Who's we? She glanced toward the conference room. Whitman Capital, sir. He studied her for a second. And you? The question caught her off guard. Me? Are you glad I came? Annie's smile became real. Yes, sir. I fixed your name tag myself. He laughed softly. Then I'm especially glad to be here. After the guests entered, Annie gathered extra tags, straightened the sign-in sheet, and checked the lobby area for loose papers. She found 1 packet left behind and carried it to the conference room door. Inside, Robert stood near the screen, speaking with the pastor and 2 city representatives. He saw Annie at the doorway and stepped over. Everything all right? Someone left a packet outside. I thought they might need it. Thank you. He took it, then glanced at the sign-in table behind her. Elaine said you caught 2 missing names. Yes, sir. Good. It was 1 word, but it held weight. As she turned back, she saw Daniel watching from beside the coffee station. His expression was flat. Not angry enough to confront, not calm enough to ignore. Annie felt the old fear in her stomach, but she had no time to tend to it. A guest needed directions to the restroom. Another asked for water. Work kept her moving, and movement helped. By 4:30, the luncheon ended without trouble. Elaine thanked the team. Tessa gave Annie a thumbs up from across the lobby. Clara whispered, "No one died. That's how you measure events." Annie almost laughed aloud. At 4:50, Daniel placed a folder on her desk. Post-event notes. Enter attendance, scan sign, in, and file copies. Yes, sir. He did not leave. And next time, when you find an error, bring it to me before copying half the office. I copied Elaine because the event details involved her. I didn't ask why. Annie looked up. Her hands were cold, but her voice stayed steady. I understand. Daniel leaned slightly closer. Do you? Because Mr. Whitman noticing you once in a park does not mean every decision you make is special. The words were quiet enough that only she heard them. For a second, the office blurred. Annie saw the park bench, the food box, the two couples staring, the shame of standing there with hunger showing through her clean clothes. Daniel had found the softest place and pressed his thumb into it. She wanted to shrink. Instead, she looked at the folder he had given her. "I'll enter the notes before I leave," she said. Daniel waited, perhaps expecting more. When he got nothing, he walked away. Clara appeared beside Annie's desk a minute later. She did not ask what Daniel had said. Maybe she knew enough from Annie's face. "In this building," Clara said quietly, "some folks will use your story like a broom to sweep you back outside. Don't hand it to them." Annie nodded, but her eyes burned. "I don't want to be the girl from the park forever," she whispered. "Then keep becoming the woman at the desk." Annie looked at her. Clara tapped the folder. "Start with that." So Annie did. She entered attendance, scanned the sign-in sheet, filed the packets, and sent the completed path to Daniel and Elaine. Then she updated her daily task list with every item from the luncheon. When she left that evening, her body felt heavy, but something inside her had changed shape. Daniel could still embarrass her. The whispers could still hurt. But she had corrected a public error, helped an event run smoothly, and stayed silent when silence was strength, not surrender. At home, she placed the temporary badge beside Robert's card again. For a long moment, she stared at both. The card was how she got in. The work was how she would stay. By the third Friday, Annie had learned that the break room could be louder than the phones. It was not always the volume. Sometimes it was the pause that came when she walked in. Sometimes it was the way a conversation changed shape as soon as she opened the refrigerator. That Friday, she entered with her lunch in a brown paper bag and found 4 people already at the table: Tessa from accounting, 2 women from leasing, and a young man from marketing whose name she could never remember because he spoke mostly in jokes. Tessa smiled. "Annie, sit with us." Annie hesitated at the door. Her first instinct was to say she had work to finish and return to her desk. But Clara had told her that hiding all the time made people think they had permission to define her from a distance. So Annie crossed the room and sat at the end of the table. The marketing man looked at her badge. "So you're the famous Annie." Tessa's smile faded a little. "Marcus." "What? I mean famous in a good way." Marcus leaned back, grinning as if charm could soften anything. "Not everybody gets personally brought in by Robert Whitman." Annie unwrapped her sandwich slowly. "I came in for an interview. After meeting him in the park, right?" The 2 leasing women looked down at their food, but neither changed the subject. Annie kept her voice calm. "Yes." Marcus snapped his fingers. "That is wild. I've sent 3 proposals up to the executive floor and never got 5 minutes with him. You ask for fries, and boom, direct line to the CEO. Tessa set her fork down. "That's enough." Marcus raised both hands. "I'm not being mean. I'm impressed. Best networking strategy I've heard all year." Heat crawled up Annie's neck. For a moment, she was back on the path in Grant Park, standing in front of strangers while hunger became public. One of the leasing women, a brunette named Kelly, spoke without looking at Annie. "People are just curious. It's not every day someone gets hired like that." "I wasn't hired like that," Annie said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "I took the test. I'm on a 30-day trial." Marcus gave a little shrug. Sure. I'm just saying, it makes a good story." Annie folded the paper around her sandwich. "It wasn't a good story while I was living it." The room went still. For once, Marcus had no quick answer. Annie stood, holding her lunch bag. "Excuse me." She made it to the restroom before the tears came, and even then she did not let them make sound. She stood at the sink with both hands on the counter, staring at her reflection beneath the bright office lights. Her blouse was clean, her hair was neat, her badge was straight. But all she could see was the girl who had asked a stranger for food and somehow become office entertainment. A stall door opened behind her. Clara stepped out, took one look at Annie's face, and said nothing for a few seconds. Then she washed her hands. Annie tried to wipe her cheeks. "I'm fine." "No, you're not." "I should be. It was just a joke." Clara dried her hands and turned to her. "A joke is only a joke when everybody gets to laugh." Annie's mouth trembled. "I don't want to be dramatic." "Good. Don't be dramatic. Be honest." "I hate that they know." "That you were hungry?" Annie nodded. Clara's face softened. "Honey, being hungry is not shameful. Making somebody's hunger into gossip is." Annie looked away, but Clara gently touched her shoulder. "You don't have to fight every fool in the building," Clara said. But you also don't have to bleed quietly so they can stay comfortable. Annie took a breath. What am I supposed to do? Go back to your desk. Finish the day. Let the people with sense feel ashamed without you handing them a performance. That was Clara's way. No speeches about rising above. No sweet words that evaporated. Just a hand on the shoulder and a map back to dignity. When Annie returned to operations, Daniel was standing near her desk with a folder in his hand. He noticed her red eyes and looked at the break room, then back at her. Personal issues? He asked. No, sir. Good. I need these entered before end of day. Annie took the folder. Yes, sir. He waited a beat. This is why people need thicker skin in office environments. Annie looked up. She could have said nothing. She could have nodded and carried his words like another weight. Instead, she heard Clara's voice. Be honest. My skin isn't the problem, Mr. Price, Annie said. The way people talk about me is. Daniel's eyebrows lifted. Careful. I am being careful. That's why I said it plainly. For a moment, he seemed almost impressed, though he would never admit it. Then he set the folder down and walked away. At 3:10, Elaine Porter appeared in the operations area. She did not often come without a reason. She stopped first at Daniel's desk, said something low, then walked to Annie. Mr. Whitman would like to see you for a minute. Annie's stomach dropped. Did I do something wrong? No, Elaine said. Bring yourself. Leave the fear. That helped, but only a little. Robert was standing by his office window when Annie entered. Downtown Chicago stretched behind him, gray and busy under the afternoon light. He turned, and his eyes went to her face. Close the door, please. She did. Elaine had not stayed. Robert gestured to the chair, but Annie remained standing. Sir, if this is about the break room, I didn't mean to cause trouble. That sentence tells me trouble was already there before you responded. Annie pressed her hands together. People are talking. I know. I can handle it. I believe you can. That doesn't mean you should have to. Robert moved to his desk and picked up a printed notice. I'm sending this to all staff today. He handed it to her. Annie read the first line. Every employee in this building deserves dignity. No one's hardest day should become office entertainment. Her vision blurred before she reached the second line. It doesn't mention you by name, Robert said. It doesn't need to. It reminds people what kind of place this is supposed to be. Annie swallowed. Won't that make them talk more? Some will, for a day. Then they'll find another way to waste time. Despite everything, Annie gave a weak laugh. Robert's voice softened. Annie, I will not let my company turn your hunger into a punchline. She looked down at the notice. I don't want anyone to think I complained. Then let them think I have eyes. She wiped under one eye quickly. Thank you. I'm not doing this as a favor. I should have done it the first time I heard someone say park bench applicant. Annie looked up. You heard that? Yes. And you still let me work with Daniel? Robert's face grew still. I gave you a fair chance in the department where the opening existed. I also wanted the work to speak for you. It has, she said, then caught herself. I mean, I'm trying to make it. I know what you meant. He leaned against the desk. But tell me something. Do you want to stay? The question frightened her because the answer mattered so much. Yes, she said. But I don't want to stay as a story people whisper about. I want to stay because I'm useful. Robert nodded once. Then keep being useful, and let me handle the whispering. The notice went out at 4. Annie was at her desk when the email arrived. Around the office, conversations quieted in small waves as people read it. No one looked directly at her for several minutes. Marcus passed her desk at 4:25 and stopped. Hey, he said, awkward now. I was out of line earlier. Annie looked at him. Yes, you were. He blinked, then nodded. I'm sorry. She waited a second. Thank you. He moved on. Tessa came by later and placed a small packet of crackers on Annie's desk. For emergency drawer, she said. Annie smiled faintly. I have an emergency drawer? Everyone who works in an office needs one. By the time Annie left that evening, the hurt had not vanished, but it had changed. It no longer belonged only to her. The room had been asked to carry its part. Outside, the city air was cold and clean. Annie walked toward the train with her folder under one arm, and Robert's words still turning inside her. No one's hardest day should become office entertainment. For the first time, She believed the story of the park did not have to follow her like shame. Maybe, one careful day at a time, it could become the reason she never let anyone else be laughed at for needing help. The Monday after Robert's notice, the office behaved like a room that had been scolded by a parent it respected. No one said anything openly. That was the first thing Annie noticed. Marcus did not make jokes near the copier. Kelly from leasing gave her a polite nod in the hallway. Even people who had never spoken to her seemed suddenly careful, as if dignity had become part of the dress code overnight. Annie did not mistake silence for kindness. Still, silence gave her space to work, and space mattered. She arrived at her desk at 8:16, opened her notebook, and wrote the date at the top of a new page. Week 4. Finished strong. Her 30-day trial was not over yet, but the end had become visible. That made every task feel heavier. A mistake this week would not be a first-week mistake. It would be evidence. Daniel would make sure of that. At 8:42, he stopped beside her desk with a folder under his arm. Friday's notice seems to have inspired everyone, he said. Annie looked up. Good morning, Mr. Price. His mouth tightened. Good morning. I need you to prepare the monthly operations summary. Use the template in the shared drive. Pull call volume, vendor updates, conference room usage, and pending tenant issues. Draft only. I'll review before it goes anywhere. Yes, sir. And Annie? Yes? This is not a place for personal statements. It's numbers, dates, categories. Keep emotion out of it. She held his gaze for 1 second. I understand. When he walked away, Clara rolled her chair back from the next row and looked around the partition. He say good morning or issue a weather warning? Annie almost laughed. Both, I think. Progress. The monthly summary was more complicated than anything Annie had been given so far. The template had tabs linked to old reports, several fields with formulas, and a notes section where last month's assistant had written in half sentences. Annie opened 3 reference files and began comparing them. At first, the numbers blurred. Call volume by property, vendor compliance by status, room usage by department, tenant issues by urgency. She wanted to ask Clara for help immediately, but stopped herself. Not because asking was wrong, but because she needed to know exactly what she did not understand. For 2 hours, she worked through the report line by line. She made a list of questions rather than interrupting after each one. At 11:05, she walked to Clara. Can I ask you 3 things? Clara turned from her screen. Only 3? You're becoming dangerous again. Annie pointed to her notes. The template pulls conference room usage from the calendar export, but last month's report adjusted for canceled meetings. I don't see where cancellations are tracked. Second, vendor compliance includes pending insurance renewals. But Daniel told me last week to upload one as active even though it was expired. I left it pending. Should pending count against compliance? Third, tenant issues are sorted by urgency, but some are missing urgency codes. Clara stared at her for a beat. Annie's stomach tightened. Was that too much? No, Clara said. That was beautiful. That was the sound of someone thinking before asking. Annie breathed. Clara walked her through the cancellations folder, then showed her how to check vendor compliance against the pending file. When they reached the missing urgency codes, Clara said, ask Daniel to classify those. That's management judgment. Annie returned to her desk and sent Daniel one concise email with the 3 items listed. He replied 20 minutes later. Cancellations in shared calendar archive. Pending vendors count as non-compliant until renewed. Use best judgment for tenant urgency. Annie read the last sentence twice. Use best judgment. It sounded like freedom and a trap in the same breath. She looked at the tenant list. 1 issue involved heat. 1 involved a broken exterior light. 1 involved a request for a rent ledger. She coded heat as urgent, exterior light as high priority, rent ledger as standard. Then she wrote a note explaining the basis for each code. At lunch, she stayed at her desk, not out of fear this time, but momentum. Tessa stopped by and set a yogurt beside her keyboard. Emergency drawer upgrade, she said. Annie looked up. You don't have to keep feeding me. I'm not. I bought the wrong flavor. What flavor? Peach. I like peach. Then look at God. Annie smiled and accepted it. A few minutes later, Robert passed through operations with Elaine. He stopped when he saw the report open on Annie's screen. Monthly summary? Yes, sir. Draft for Mr. Price. First one? Yes, sir. He glanced at the notes beside her keyboard. You're documenting assumptions. Miss Collins said documentation helps. She's right. He looked at her for a moment. How are you holding up? The question was ordinary, but Annie knew he was not asking about the report alone. She lowered her voice. Better than Friday. Good. I didn't want that email to go out because of me. It went out because of us, Robert said. A company either protects dignity before it is convenient, or it teaches people that dignity is optional. Annie sat with that. Robert continued, quieter now. But I also want to say something plainly. I didn't bring you here to make you grateful. Gratitude is not a job requirement. Her eyes rose to his. You owe this office honest work, he said. You do not owe anyone shame. Annie swallowed. I keep trying to remember that. Keep trying. He moved on with Elaine, leaving the words behind. By 3:30, the report was complete except for Daniel's review. Annie sent it with a short note, then printed a copy for her records. 10 minutes later, Daniel appeared. You coded the exterior light as high priority. Yes, sir. It's at an entrance. And the note said 2 residents complained about feeling unsafe after dark. The protocol says lighting issues are standard unless there's injury. I saw that, Annie said carefully. But the property note said front entrance, and the tenant issue guide says safety concerns can be elevated if access is affected. I added a comment. Daniel looked at the printed copy. You added a lot of comments. I wanted the choices to be clear. Or you wanted to protect yourself. Annie felt the sting, but this time it did not spread as far. Both can be true, sir. Daniel looked at her sharply. She kept her hands folded. I want the report to be right. And I also know I'm still being evaluated. For the first time, Daniel seemed to have no immediate reply. He flipped through the pages. The report is acceptable. Remove 2 of the longer comments. And send the revised version by 5. Yes, sir. He turned to leave, then paused. And the vendor you flagged last week? Legal asked for the renewal certificate. It wasn't on file. Annie looked up. Daniel did not quite meet her eyes. Pending was the correct folder. Then he walked away. Annie sat very still. It was not an apology. It was not praise. But from Daniel, it was almost a confession. Clara appeared at the edge of her desk, pretending to sort mail. Did I hear a pig fly? Annie pressed her lips together, trying not to smile. He said pending was correct. Frame it. At 5:03, Annie sent the revised report. She packed her folder slowly. Tired but steady. The day had not been easy. Daniel had not become kind. The office had not become home, but something had shifted inside her. She no longer measured every hour by whether people accepted her. She measured it by whether the work held up. As she waited for the elevator, Margaret stepped beside her. I reviewed your daily task logs, Margaret said. Annie turned. Yes, ma'am? They're thorough. Thank you. Your speed still needs improvement. I know, but your judgment is developing. Margaret looked at the elevator doors. That matters more than many people think. Annie felt warmth rise behind her eyes, but she kept her voice steady. I appreciate that. The elevator opened. They stepped inside with 2 other employees. No one spoke until the lobby. Outside, evening settled over Chicago. Annie walked toward the train with her folder against her side and a strange feeling in her chest. Not joy exactly. Not safety. Something quieter. Maybe belonging did not arrive all at once. Maybe it came in pieces. A corrected report. A documented choice. A supervisor forced to admit she had been right. A woman in HR saying judgment matters. Annie had spent so long asking for a chance that she had not known what it would feel like to start earning one. Now she knew. It felt like work. On the last Monday of Annie's trial period, Daniel submitted his evaluation before lunch. Annie did not see the report at first. She felt it. The operations area had been normal all morning. Phones ringing. Printers humming. Clara muttering at the copier like it was a stubborn mule. Then Daniel walked past Annie's desk with a sealed folder in his hand and did not look at her. 5 minutes later, Margaret's office door closed. Annie kept typing. She was entering tenant call notes from the weekend line, sorting them by property and urgency. A broken heater. A question about rent assistance. A request for a copy of a lease. Ordinary things. Manageable things. Still, her fingers felt stiff. Clara rolled her chair back. Don't stare at Margaret's door. I'm not. You've looked at it 6 times in 4 minutes. Annie lowered her eyes to the screen. He turned in the report. Probably. What if it's bad? Then we read what's true and what's noise. Annie tried to smile. We? Clara looked over her glasses. I'm old. I get to say we when I'm worried. At 12:20, Margaret asked Annie to come in at 2 o'clock. No explanation. Just a calendar invite with the subject line. Trial period review. Annie ate lunch at her desk because the break room felt too far away. Tessa stopped by with a small packet of crackers, saw Annie's face, and put it down without joking. 2 o'clock? Tessa asked. Annie nodded. You've done good work. I hope good work is enough. Tessa's face changed. It should be. That was the trouble. Annie had learned that should be and is were not always neighbors. At 1:55, Annie stood outside Margaret's office with her notebook pressed against her ribs. She had listed every major task from the past 30 days. Call logs completed. Vendor files scanned. West Haven meeting supported. Missing luncheon names corrected. Monthly operations summary drafted. Expired insurance certificate flagged. Daily task lists maintained. She had proof that she had worked, but proof did not stop her hands from feeling cold. Come in, Margaret called. Daniel was already inside, seated near the window. Margaret sat behind her desk, Annie's file open in front of her. A printed copy of Daniel's report rested on top. Sit down, Annie, Margaret said. Annie sat. Margaret folded her hands. This is your trial period review. Mr. Price submitted his evaluation this morning. I'll summarize the key points, and you'll have a chance to respond. Yes, ma'am. Daniel crossed one leg over the other. I want to be clear from the start. This isn't personal. Annie looked at him. All right. He glanced at Margaret, then back at Annie. You've shown effort. No one disputes that. But effort and readiness are different things. This department requires speed, confidence, and independent execution. In my assessment, you're not there yet. Annie felt the words hit one by one, but she kept her face still. Margaret looked down at the report. The concerns listed are speed, excessive clarification questions, limited experience with office software, and difficulty adapting to office culture. Office culture. Annie knew what that meant when people did not want to say the rest. Margaret continued. Mr. Price recommends that we do not extend permanent employment at this time. For a moment, Annie heard nothing but the air system above them. Then Clara's voice rose inside her. Don't absorb the mood. Annie opened her notebook. May I respond? Margaret nodded. Yes. Annie looked at the first page of her notes, but she did not read from it yet. She needed her own voice first. I know I'm not as fast as someone who has done this for years, she said. I know I needed training. I never hid that. But I don't think needing training is the same as not being ready. Daniel shifted slightly. Annie turned a page. In the first week, I completed phone logs, learned the naming system, scanned files, and corrected my process after feedback. In the second week, I helped prevent a city meeting from starting late by contacting Elaine and moving the room setup. I created a conference room equipment chart that Elaine asked me to clean up for team use. Margaret glanced at Daniel. Annie went on, her voice steadier now. I flagged an expired vendor insurance certificate that was later confirmed missing by legal. I corrected the sign-in sheet for the West Haven luncheon when 2 confirmed guests were missing. I completed the monthly operations summary and documented the assumptions I made. Daniel spoke. No one said you did nothing, Annie. I didn't say that. Annie looked at him. But your report lists my early mistakes and not the corrected outcomes. I think both matter. The room went quiet. Margaret leaned back slightly. Continue, Annie swallowed. About asking questions. I ask when guessing could create a mistake. I'm trying to ask better questions, not fewer questions. There's a difference. Margaret's pen moved once. Daniel's tone tightened. And office culture? Annie met his eyes. She knew this was dangerous ground, but she was tired of the phrase being used like a closed door. If office culture means being on time, doing the work, documenting tasks, speaking respectfully, and learning from correction, Then I have tried to meet it every day, she said. If it means pretending jokes about my hardest day don't hurt, or staying quiet when people decide I don't belong here before they review my work, then I still need help understanding that part. Margaret's pen stopped. Daniel looked away first. A knock came at the door. Elaine Porter stepped in with a file. Sorry to interrupt. Margaret. Robert asked that this be included in Annie's review. Daniel's jaw tightened. Margaret took the file. Thank you. Elaine left. Margaret opened it. Inside were 3 printed emails. Elaine's note praising Annie's handling of the West Haven scheduling issue, legal's request for the expired vendor certificate, and Robert's forwarded note about the conference room chart. Margaret read silently. Daniel said, Robert's involvement may complicate an objective review. Margaret looked at him. Objective means all relevant information, Daniel, not only yours. Annie lowered her eyes before anyone could see what that sentence did to her. Margaret set the file down. I'm not making a final decision this minute. Annie's stomach dropped again. Margaret continued. There is one more issue we need resolved first. The West Haven Community Project packet is incomplete. A data folder connected to the final presentation is missing several entries. The board review is tomorrow afternoon. Daniel believes the error may have occurred during recent support work. Annie looked up. My support work? Daniel's voice was smooth. You handled several related files during the luncheon and monthly summary. I scanned sign-ins and updated attendance. I didn't work on the project data folder. You had access. The word access sat in the room like an accusation. Margaret watched Annie carefully. I am not assigning blame, but we need the missing information located by tomorrow morning. Annie, because your trial review is tied to this department's work, I'm giving you the opportunity to help trace the issue. Daniel will provide the folder path. Clara may assist for 1 hour if needed. After that, I want findings in writing. Annie understood what was happening. Her job was already hanging by a thread, and now that thread had been tied to missing data. She could say it was unfair. She could cry. She could go back to being the girl on the bench, apologizing for needing a chance. Instead, she closed her notebook. I'll trace it, she said. Daniel looked surprised. It may take hours. Then I'll stay. Margaret nodded once. Document every step. I will. When Annie stepped out of the office, Clara was standing near the copier, pretending not to wait. She saw Annie's face and stopped pretending. Well? Annie held the notebook tighter. Daniel recommended no. Clara's mouth hardened. Of course he did. There's missing West Haven data. They think I might have touched it. Did you? No. Then we prove where it went. Annie looked toward her desk. The office seemed larger than it had that morning. Colder. But the computer at her station was still on. Her notes were still there. The work was still something she could hold. At 5:30, most of the office began to empty. Coats came off chairs. Elevators chimed. People said good night in tired voices. Annie stayed at her desk with the West Haven folder path open on her screen and a blank document titled Data Trace Notes. Clara pulled up a chair beside her and set down 2 cups of coffee. 1 hour, Clara said. That's what Margaret allowed. Annie looked at the screen. Then we better use it well. For the first time all day, Clara smiled. Now you sound like somebody at a desk. Annie placed her fingers on the keyboard and began. At 5:32, Annie opened the West Haven project folder and began writing every step in the trace document. 5:32 p.m., open shared drive. Projects is greater than West Haven is greater than board review is greater than final packet. Clara sat beside her with a cup of coffee she had not touched. Start with what's missing. Annie opened Margaret's note. 3 resident outreach entries, 2 vendor cost estimates, and the attendance update from the luncheon. Good. Now find the last version that had them. The shared folder held more files than Annie expected. Draft 1, Draft 2, Final Draft, Updated, Final Packet New, West Haven Board Final. West Haven Board Final used this one. Annie stared at the screen. Clara sighed. That right there is why the Lord invented naming standards, and why people ignore him. Annie almost smiled, but her stomach was too tight. She opened the version history for the most recent file. The missing entries had disappeared sometime between Friday at 4:18 p.m. and Monday at 9:06 a.m. She wrote it down. Daniel walked by at 5:50 with his coat over his arm. He slowed near Annie's desk. Still at it? Yes, sir. Don't stay all night chasing ghosts. Sometimes files are just wrong because people mishandle them. Clara looked over her glasses. And sometimes they're wrong because people don't keep clean folders. Daniel ignored her. Send whatever you find to Margaret. I will, Annie said. He left without another word. Clara waited until he was out of earshot. Notice what he didn't ask? What? He didn't ask what you found. Annie looked at the version history again. Maybe he doesn't think I'll find anything. Maybe. At 6:30, Clara's allowed hour was over. She stood slowly and put on her coat. I have to go before my knees file a complaint. Thank you for staying. You know how to check version history. You know how to search by date. You know how to compare file paths. Don't panic. Don't rush. And don't make the facts more polite than they are. Annie looked up. What does that mean? It means if the file says Daniel moved something, don't write. The document may have relocated itself. Despite the fear sitting in her chest, Annie laughed. Clara squeezed her shoulder once. Call me if you get locked in with the cleaning crew. After Clara left, the office grew quiet in layers. First the voices faded, then the phones, then the printers. By 7:15, only a few lights remained over the operations area. Annie's desk lamp made a small circle around her notebook, coffee cup, and the folder that had followed her from interview to interview. She ate the crackers Tessa had left in her emergency drawer and kept working. The first clue came from an archived file named West Haven Outreach Backup. It was buried 2 folders deep under a subfolder labeled Old Attachments. Annie opened it and found the 3 missing resident outreach entries. They had been exported from the database the previous Thursday. That meant the data existed after Annie's luncheon work. She wrote, Outreach entries present Thursday, 3:44 p.m. in backup export. The second clue took longer. The 2 vendor cost estimates were not in the final folder, but a search by vendor name found them in a folder for a different project, Lakefront Renewal. Annie checked the file properties. They had been moved there Friday at 5:12 p.m. Her heart began to beat harder. Friday at 5:12 p.m., Annie had already sent her daily task list and was waiting for the elevator. She opened the access log. The account name appeared in the right column. D. Price. Annie stared at it for a long moment, then leaned closer as if the letters might change. They did not. She did not celebrate. She did not even breathe easier. She took a screenshot, copied the log path, and wrote down the details. At 8:03, the cleaning crew arrived. One woman with a cart nodded toward her. Working late? Yes, ma'am. Don't let this place eat you. Annie looked at the screen. I'm trying not to. The woman smiled and moved on. The final missing piece was the attendance update from the luncheon. Annie checked the scan folder, the event folder, and the operations archive. Nothing. Then she remembered the sign-in sheet she had scanned and emailed after the luncheon. She opened her sent folder and searched West Haven attendance. There it was, sent Wednesday, 5:08 p.m., to Daniel Price and Elaine Porter. Attachment included. She opened the email. The attachment had the corrected attendance sheet, including Reverend Holloway and Miss Denise Porter. Elaine had replied, Received. Thank you. Annie sat back. The attendance update had not been missing because she failed to send it. It was missing because it had never been added to the final packet after she sent it. Who was responsible for final packet assembly? She checked the procedure document. Final project packet assembly. Operations manager, Daniel Price. Annie's hands went cold. At 8:26, she began organizing the findings. She did not write angry words. She did not accuse. She listed dates, times, folders, file names, and account activity. Clara's advice guided every sentence. Don't make the facts more polite than they are. At 9:10, Annie emailed Margaret. Subject, West Haven data trace findings. Miss Collins, attached are my trace notes for the missing West Haven data. Summary. The resident outreach entries were present in the Thursday backup export. The vendor cost estimates appear to have been moved to the Lakefront Renewal folder Friday at 5:12 p.m. under Mr. Price's account. The corrected attendance update was sent to Mr. Price and Mrs. Porter Wednesday at 5:08 p.m., but does not appear to have been added to the final packet. I have included file paths, timestamps, and screenshots for review. She stared at the email for nearly a full minute before sending it. Then she copied the notes to a printed packet, because paper felt harder to erase. At 9:22, Margaret replied, "Thank you. Please be in conference room 18B at 8:45 tomorrow morning. Bring your notes." Annie's stomach tightened again. There would be a meeting. She packed slowly. The office was almost empty now. Chicago glittered beyond the windows, indifferent and wide. Annie returned the visitor badge to the overnight security desk downstairs. The guard looked at the time. "Long day." "Yes, sir." "Good night, Annie." She paused. He had used her name. "Good night." Outside, the night air was cold enough to wake her fully. She walked to the train with the printed packet under her coat, one hand pressed against it. She was tired, hungry again, and scared of what morning might bring. But beneath the fear was something steadier. The truth had a shape now. It had file paths, timestamps, sent emails, and a name in an access log. In her room above the laundromat, Annie placed the packet beside Robert's business card and her temporary badge. The three things looked strange together: the chance, the work, and the proof. She sat on the edge of the bed without turning on the television or checking her phone. The room hummed with the machines below. Her shoes waited by the door, polished but worn thin at the soles. Tomorrow, she would walk into a conference room where Daniel might call her mistaken, inexperienced, or defensive. He might speak smoothly. He might smile. He might make the truth sound like confusion. Annie was afraid of that, but she was more afraid of letting him make her small again. She opened her notebook and wrote one line beneath the day's task list: "Facts do not need to shout." Then she turned out the light. At 8:41 the next morning, Annie stood outside conference room 18B, with the printed packet held against her chest. She had arrived early, but not too early. 15 minutes. Professional. Her blouse was clean, her shoes were old, and her hands were cold, despite the heat coming through the vents. Inside the room, voices moved behind the closed door. Margaret's calm tone. Daniel's lower one. Elaine's quick, precise words. Another voice, Annie recognized only from company meetings. Robert Whitman. She had not known he would be there. For 1 second, she wanted to turn around. Not run, exactly. Just step into the restroom, breathe, gather herself, become someone else. But the packet in her arms felt heavier than fear. Facts do not need to shout. She had written that last night. Now she had to believe it. Elaine opened the door. "Annie, come in." Conference room 18B looked different from the night she had arranged it for the West Haven meeting. The long table was clear, except for laptops, coffee cups, and a pitcher of water. Margaret sat near the center with Annie's file open. Daniel sat across from her, jacket buttoned, face controlled. Robert stood by the window, one hand in his pocket, looking out over the city. When Annie entered, he turned. "Good morning, Miss Carter." "Good morning, Mr. Whitman." Margaret gestured to the chair beside Elaine. "Sit down, Annie." Annie sat and placed the packet in front of her, keeping one hand on it. Margaret began. "We're here to review the West Haven missing data issue before the board packet is finalized. Annie, I received your email last night. Thank you for the detailed notes." Daniel leaned back slightly. "Before we go too far, I want to point out that file logs can be misleading. Shared drives are imperfect. New users sometimes misunderstand folder history." Annie felt the words brush against her like cold air. New users misunderstand. He had chosen them carefully. Margaret looked at him. "You'll have a chance to respond. Annie, walk us through what you found." Annie opened the packet. Her fingers trembled once, then steadied. The missing data was listed as 3 resident outreach entries, 2 vendor cost estimates, and the corrected attendance update from the luncheon, she said. "I started by checking the most recent final packet, and then compared it with older versions." She handed Margaret the first page. The 3 resident outreach entries were not in the final packet, but they were present in a backup export from Thursday at 3:44 p.m. That means they existed after my luncheon support work. Margaret followed the printed path. Elaine leaned closer to read. Daniel said, "Backup exports are not always complete. These were complete enough to show the missing entries," Annie said, then stopped. Her voice had come out firmer than she expected. She softened it without weakening it. I included the screenshot on page 2. Robert said nothing, but his eyes stayed on her, steady. Annie continued. The 2 vendor cost estimates were found in a folder for lakefront renewal, not West Haven. The file properties show they were moved Friday at 5:12 p.m. Daniel's expression did not change. Margaret turned the page. Moved by which account? Annie swallowed. D. Price. The room went quiet. Daniel gave a short breath through his nose. That doesn't prove I moved them. My account may have been open. Assistants access my workstation. Elaine looked up. Assistants should not have your login credentials. They don't, Daniel said quickly. I'm saying the log may not tell the whole story. Annie looked at the packet. I didn't have access to your workstation, Mr. Price. At 5:12 on Friday, I had already sent my task list and was waiting for the elevator. The security exit log shows I returned my badge at 5:09. Margaret's eyes moved to the next page. Annie had included the badge return time because Clara had once said small facts were the nails that held truth to the wall. Robert finally spoke. You pulled the security log? Annie looked at him. The front desk confirmed my badge return time this morning when I arrived. I wrote it down and asked them to email Elaine. I didn't want to include it unless it mattered. Elaine checked her tablet. I have that email. Badge returned at 5:09 p.m. Daniel's jaw tightened. This is becoming excessive. Margaret looked at him. No, this is becoming documented. Annie felt the sentence pass through her like light through a narrow window. She turned to the next section. The attendance update was sent from my email to Mr. Price and Mrs. Porter on Wednesday at 5:08 p.m. The attachment included the corrected sign-in sheet with Reverend Holloway and Miss Denise Porter. Mrs. Porter replied received. But the final project packet assembly procedure says the operations manager is responsible for adding corrected event documents to the packet. Elaine nodded. That is the current procedure. Daniel straightened. I receive dozens of emails a day. One attachment being missed is not misconduct. No one said misconduct, Margaret said. Daniel looked at Annie. But that's what she's implying. Annie's mouth went dry. This was the place where she could sound angry and lose the room. She rested her hand flat on the packet. I'm not implying anything, she said. I'm saying the missing files were not caused by my scan or attendance work. I'm saying the records show where they were, where they went, and who was responsible for adding them to the final packet. Daniel gave a small, humorless laugh. For someone who didn't know how to use our system a month ago, you've become very confident. Annie looked at him. Her heart was pounding, but her voice stayed quiet. No, sir. I've become careful. Robert's eyes shifted to Daniel. Margaret closed the packet halfway. Daniel, why were West Haven cost estimates moved into lakefront renewal? Daniel's face hardened. I don't remember moving them, but they were moved under your account. So the log says. Do you have an alternative explanation? He looked from Margaret to Robert. My point is that we are placing too much weight on a temporary employee's interpretation of system records. Annie felt the old shame rise, quick and hot. Temporary, new, inexperienced. He was trying to make her smaller than the facts she had brought. Robert stepped away from the window. Daniel, the question wasn't about Annie's status. It was about your account. Daniel turned toward him. Robert, with respect, your personal investment in this hire has made the department uncomfortable. Annie's chest tightened. Robert's voice did not rise. My personal investment was in giving someone a fair chance. Your discomfort seems to be with her using it. No one spoke. Margaret looked down at Daniel's evaluation report, then at Annie's packet. Here is what I see. Annie lacks experience. That was never hidden. She works slower than a seasoned assistant. Also true. But she documents carefully, escalates when appropriate, identifies errors, and follows evidence without guessing. Those are not minor qualities. Annie gripped her hands under the table. Margaret turned to Daniel. Your evaluation omits several documented contributions and overstates early mistakes without noting improvement. That concerns me. Daniel's face flushed slightly. I evaluated readiness. You evaluated fit, Margaret said. And fit is too often the word people use when they mean someone didn't arrive the way they expected. The sentence landed with a weight that made Annie blink hard. Robert looked at Margaret. Recommendation? Margaret closed Annie's file. Extend permanent employment. Junior administrative assistant. Standard first-year review schedule. Adisha Dahl had in Excel and internal systems. Clara Bennett to serve as mentor for the next 60 days. Annie stopped breathing for half a second. Daniel looked away. Robert nodded, approved. Annie looked at Margaret. Then Robert. Then the packet in front of her. The room blurred. But she would not cry. Not yet. Not in the room where she had fought to be seen as capable. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was rough. "I won't waste it." Margaret's expression softened. "Don't make promises like that. Just do the work." A small laugh escaped Annie before she could stop it. Robert smiled faintly. "That sounds familiar." Elaine gathered the copies. "I'll help update the final West Haven packet. Annie, send me the cleaned folder paths." "Yes, ma'am." Daniel stood. "Am I dismissed?" Robert looked at him. "Not quite. Margaret and I will meet with you at 10:30 regarding management practices in operations support." Daniel's mouth tightened, but he nodded and left. When the door closed, the room felt larger. Annie stood slowly. "Should I go back to my desk?" "Yes," Margaret said. "As an employee." The word nearly broke her. Outside the conference room, Clara was pretending to refill her water bottle, badly. Annie walked up to her, trying to keep her face calm. "Well?" Clara asked. Annie held up the packet. "Permanent." Clara set the bottle down and pulled her into a quick, fierce hug. "That's my girl." Annie let herself close her eyes for 1 second. Then she stepped back, wiped her face before tears could fully form, and looked toward her desk. The temporary nameplate still said Annie Carter. For the first time, it did not feel temporary. 6 months later, Annie Carter walked into Whitman Capital and Properties at 8:14 on a Monday morning, and no one at the front desk asked why she was there. The security guard looked up, smiled, and slid her employee badge across the counter because the scanner had been acting up again. "Morning, Annie." "Morning, Mr. Lewis. You're early." "Habit. Good one to keep." She clipped the badge to her coat and crossed the lobby without counting the steps. She no longer moved through the building as if the floor might reject her. Her shoes were different now. Black flats with solid soles she had bought after her first full paycheck. Not expensive, not fancy, but new. The first morning she wore them, Clara had looked down and said, "Those are shoes with opinions." Annie had laughed all the way to her desk. Upstairs, the operations area was already waking. Phones blinked. The copier coughed. Someone had left a half-empty coffee cup too close to the printer again. Annie hung her coat, turned on her computer, and straightened the small framed card beside her monitor. It was Robert's old business card, the one from the park. The handwritten line on the back had faded slightly where her thumb had touched it too many times. "Please allow Annie Carter to see me Monday at 9 a.m. She kept it there not because she wanted pity, but because she believed people should remember the door that opened for them, not to live in that doorway forever, but to hold it open when someone else came near. Clara appeared with a stack of mail and a look of theatrical suffering. "If one more person writes urgent on something that is clearly not urgent, I'm retiring before lunch." "You said that Friday." "And I meant it Friday." Annie took half the stack. "I'll sort these." Clara glanced at the framed card. "Big day." Annie nodded. 3 o'clock. "Nervous?" "A little." "Good. Means you care." At 3, Robert would announce the new hiring program at a small company meeting. It had started as a conversation after Annie's permanent hire. Robert had asked Margaret for a report on entry-level hiring practices. Margaret, to her credit, did not soften the truth. The company had been asking for experience on jobs meant to create experience. Applications from South and West Side zip codes were screened more harshly. Candidates without college credits rarely reached a human interview, even when the job did not require a degree. Robert had read the report twice, then called Annie, Margaret, Elaine, and Clara into his office. "What would have happened," he asked, "if I had not met Annie in the park?" No one answered quickly. Margaret finally said, "Her resume probably would not have reached my desk." Robert nodded. "Then we have been losing people before we ever met them." That was how the Second Chance Desk program began. It would offer paid entry-level trials, skills testing instead of resume filtering, mentorship, transportation vouchers for the first month, and partnerships with community centers that already knew young people looking for work. It was not charity. Robert insisted on that. It was a different door with fair hinges. Annie spent the morning preparing packets for the meeting. She checked every name, every schedule, every printed sheet. 6 months ago, the same kind of task would have made her hands shake. Now she moved carefully without moving fearfully. There was a difference, and she had earned it. At lunch, she sat in the break room with Tessa and Clara. Marcus from marketing came in, saw the table, and lifted a hand. "Annie, I finished the flyer draft for the program, sent it to you for review. I'll check it after lunch." "No rush." Clara looked at him over her soup. "That's growth, Marcus. You said something useful and then stopped talking." He grinned. "I'm a changed man." Annie smiled. Marcus was not her closest friend, but he had changed in the ways people sometimes do when corrected clearly and given a chance to do better. He no longer joked about the park. Once, after a staff meeting, he had quietly told Annie that his younger sister had stopped applying for office jobs because every listing wanted experience she did not have. Annie had sent him the first draft of the second chance desk proposal that same afternoon. At 2:45, employees began filling conference room 18B. Annie stood near the side table, arranging sign-in sheets and program packets. Daniel Price was no longer operations support manager. After the review, he had been moved into a role with no direct supervision, while Margaret oversaw management retraining. He had not apologized to Annie in a dramatic way. Men like Daniel rarely did. But one afternoon, passing her desk, he had said, "The revised vendor tracker works well." Annie had accepted that as the small, stiff peace offering it was. Robert entered at 3 with Margaret and Elaine. He wore a navy suit, but no tie. He looked around the room, waited for the last whisper to settle, and began without ceremony. 6 months ago, a young woman came into this company with a thin resume, no college degree, and more determination than most resumes know how to show. Annie looked down at the stack of packets, but Clara nudged her elbow. Robert continued. She did not need standards lowered. She needed a fair way to meet them. That distinction matters. The room was quiet. We have asked for experience from people we were unwilling to train. We have mistaken polish for potential. We have looked at addresses, gaps, and unfamiliar paths, and called them risk. Sometimes they are not risk. Sometimes they are evidence that someone has been working twice as hard to reach the same door. Annie felt her throat tighten, not from shame this time, from being seen without being exposed. Robert turned slightly toward her. Annie Carter helped us see that. She also helped build what we are announcing today. People looked at her, but this time the attention did not feel like the park path. She stood straight. Margaret explained the program details: paid training, assigned mentors, skills tests, documented evaluation, community referrals, and lunch support during the first 2 weeks. Clara stood when Margaret named her mentor lead and muttered, "Lord help them," which made the room laugh in the right way. After the meeting, Robert came to Annie's desk. "You handled the packet well. I checked the names 4 times. I would have expected nothing less." She smiled. "Thank you, Mr. Whitman." He looked at the framed business card beside her monitor. "You still keep it there?" "Yes." "Why?" "To remember that one piece of paper can change what happens next." Robert nodded, but his eyes moved beyond the card, toward something only he could see. "My mother kept her first pay stub in a Bible for 30 years. Said it reminded her she had survived harder Mondays than the one in front of her." Annie touched the frame. "Your mother and my grandmother would have liked each other." "I think so." That Saturday, Annie returned to Grant Park. The air was warmer now, with spring working its way into the grass. People moved along the paths with strollers, dogs, coffee, and the slow relief of a weekend. Annie wore a simple blue blouse, dark pants, and the same new shoes with opinions. In one hand, she carried a paper bag from the chicken place near the park. In the other, a small stack of flyers. Robert was already sitting on the bench. He looked up as she approached. "You're late." She checked her phone. 2 minutes. "Standards are falling." She handed him a box of fries. "I brought lunch, so forgive me. That depends on whether you're sharing." She sat beside him, not at the far end this time. The space between them had changed over the months, filled by work, trust, and the quiet respect that comes when one person gives help without ownership and the other receives it without surrendering pride. For a while, they ate without speaking. Annie looked across the path to where the church van had once packed up its empty boxes. Today, a community bulletin board stood nearby. She walked over and pinned one of the flyers to it. Second Chance Desk Program. Paid entry-level office training. No college degree required. Skills test provided. Apply through Whitman Capital and Community Partners. Robert came to stand beside her. "You know," Annie said, looking at the flyer, "that day I thought I was asking for leftovers." Robert glanced at her. "No, Annie. You were asking for a chance. I just didn't understand it yet." She smiled, but her eyes filled anyway. A young woman with a backpack slowed near the bulletin board. She read the flyer, then looked at Annie. "Is this real?" Annie knew that question. Not the words, but the fear behind them. "Is this another fake door? Will someone laugh if I try? Do people like me get to walk in?" "Yes," Annie said. "It's real." The young woman touched one of the tear-off contact slips at the bottom. "Do I need experience?" "No, just be willing to learn and show up on time." The girl pulled off a slip and held it carefully. "Thank you." After she walked away, Annie sat back down on the bench. The park looked ordinary. That seemed right to her. Life-changing moments did not always come with thunder. Sometimes they came with cooling fries, old shoes, and someone who decided not to look away. Robert folded the empty food box and set it beside him. "You ever think about going back to school?" Annie looked at the flyer, then at the path ahead. "Every day. And I'm going to start with evening classes." "Good. You say that like you already knew." "I hoped." Annie laughed softly. "You always talk like a man who owns the calendar." "No, just a man who has learned that tomorrow treats prepared people better." They sat until the light began to lean west. Before they left, Annie placed one unopened box of chicken and fries on the picnic table near the bulletin board with a note written on a napkin. "If you're hungry, please take this. If you need work, read the flyer. You matter before either one." She did not wait to see who took it. Dignity, she had learned, sometimes meant helping without making the hungry perform gratitude. As she and Robert walked toward the park exit, Annie looked back once at the bench where she had stood months before, swallowing shame and asking for a little food. She did not feel embarrassed anymore. That girl had not been weak. That girl had been tired, hungry, and still carrying resumes. That girl had not quit. And because she had not quit, Monday had come. The world had not become fair. Annie knew better than that. Justice did not always arrive on time, and it did not always arrive clean. Sometimes it came late, tired, and carrying scars. But when it came, you still had to open the door. Annie stepped onto the sidewalk beside Robert, her badge tucked in her purse, her future still unfinished, and her name no longer temporary. The lesson of Annie's story is that a person's hardest moment should never define their worth. Hunger, poverty, old shoes, or a thin resume do not mean someone is lazy or incapable. Sometimes people are not asking for charity. They are asking for one fair chance to prove what they can do. Robert's kindness mattered not because he gave Annie food, but because he saw her dignity and opened a real door. The story reminds us that compassion should not make people feel small, and justice often begins when someone chooses to look closer instead of looking away. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only,